Liarte Elheim was sitting on the ground and a man was asking her to raise her head. Continuing, the Duke noted that, unlike her twin brother Leon, the girl did not awaken the power of water until she turned 20. However, fortunately, a solution to this problem was found in an ancient manuscript. And the death of the main character will improve Leon's water power, so, in the man's opinion, she should not be too sad. Because the entire Elheim family will forever remember Liarte's sacrifice. Liarte Elheim was the only one in the family who was not awakened. The girl was a disgrace to the duchy and absolutely no one loved her, no matter how much she wanted to. And now, while the main character was in her thoughts, the Duke ordered the ritual to begin. A blue circle of water immediately appeared around Liarte, lifting the stone up. The girl herself really tried very hard to make herself loved, but it was all in vain. And if the main character has another chance, she will definitely take advantage of it. At this moment, the Duke, seeing what was happening, was shocked and could not believe it. The young man was taken aback and froze as he began to understand that Liarte had awakened the power of water after all. Everyone else also began to panic and turned to the Duke with words about something happening to the spirit stone. After a few seconds, the stone completely cracked and fell apart, and the main character hung in the air, thinking that she absolutely had to escape. However, suddenly the young man began to beg Liarte through the water to wake up. And from this, the girl opened her eyes in panic, trying to catch her breath. Looking around, the main character did not understand where she was, because on the morning of the execution, this room was burned down. So Liarte assumed that it was all just a dream, otherwise she could not have survived. At that moment, Leon entered the room and asked how the main character was feeling. But the girl immediately became tense and asked her brother why he had come to her. At this, the young man came closer, explaining that he wanted to visit Liarte. Then Leon took his sister by the hand and said that because of her, all the plans did not come to fruition. And also, continuing, the young man added that the main character irritates him. The girl herself, examining Leon, recalled the expression on his face that she had already seen. 3 years ago, the main character protected a young man from hired killers. Then the girl was wounded and lost consciousness, so all of Leon's business had to be postponed. And realizing that now everything was absolutely the same as that day, Liarte understood that she had returned to the past. That's why the main character immediately took her hand back and said that Leon also annoyed her. Continuing, the girl noted that her brother need not worry, since she would not act so recklessly a second time. The young man was shocked by these words, and he asked Liarte what she was talking about. However, at that moment Lionel burst into the room, asking Leon to follow him. Because the spirit stone suddenly began to shine, and the Duke called all the awakened ones to look at it. Leon immediately got out of bed and asked the young man to tell him everything along the way. And while the young man was leaving, Lionel looked gloomily at the main character and did not take his eyes off her. Liarte herself also looked at the young man with displeasure until he left the room. Left alone, the girl thought about the fact that at the moment of execution, the spirit stone had split and it seemed to her that some energy was penetrating her body. And assuming that she had awakened the power of water, the main character decided to try. Then Liarte made a certain gesture with her hands and a water ball appeared between them, which made her very happy. And although the girl does not know whether this is a blessing or not, this time she will definitely leave the Duchy of Elheim. At this time, while in the carriage, the knight asked the younger gentleman how his eyes were, and the young man replied that he still saw absolutely nothing. To this, the knight remarked that he did not think that the curse would be lifted from the young man, since Elheim was sure that Bersha was behind the commotion with the murderers that had occurred 2 days earlier. The gentleman himself also did not know whether they would help him or not, but there were no other options, because only a water-awakened one could remove the curse, and if the duchy refused, he would collect dirt on them. At that moment, the knight turned his gaze to the window and announced that the imperial family had sent a gift. And the young man said that the gift should be returned, since the Empire always does this. The knight asked what the young man would do if someone were found who could remove the curse. And the younger gentleman said that he would give his savior everything he wanted, kill his enemies, and restore justice. After all, this is Birch's motto, which the young man will not violate. Already in the Duke's office, the man asked Mikhail why he had come to see him. And the younger gentleman said that he had come to ask for something. However, if the Duke is discouraged by the arrival of the youth, he can turn him around right now. But after these words, the young man took out an envelope and also said that he had official permission to visit. This envelope contained a document stipulating that the visitor would not cause harm to the family, and a visitor with an official permit signed by the temple and the emperor cannot be expelled. However, The Duke still looked at the young man with suspicion, as he thought that he was deceiving him. And Mikhail, noticing the man's expression, asked why he looked as if he was afraid of the Bersha family's power. But the Duke ignored these words and asked the younger gentleman to begin the conversation. Hearing this, the young man said that he had become completely blind, and even the saints could not remove the curse. And if there was a water awakened who could cure Mikhail of his blindness, he would like to ask him for help. However, the man answered without hesitation that it would all be a bit difficult. After all, anyone who decides to remove a curse of this kind may lose their own life, and it would be better to give the right to choose than to force someone. So, having said this, the Duke asked the young man to wait for 1 month for a volunteer to appear. Although Mikhail was not entirely happy with this answer, he still agreed and left the office. Already on the street, the knight asked the master whether Elheim would remove the curse. And the young man answered negatively, noting that this was expected. After all, Mikhail always doubted the existence of an awakened one who would remove the curse. At that moment, the main character was watching the young men from her window. After a while, the knight looked around and informed Mikhail that no one was visible on the horizon, and even the servants had not come as volunteers. And then, turning his gaze to the gentleman, the young man asked him if he would continue to stay here. To which Mikhail told about the rumors that Duke Elheim had just gathered all the awakened. After these words, the young man thought and noted that this meeting was an excuse to visit the Duke. Therefore, the younger lord asked Valto to go to the duchy and gather information about Elheim, and the knight immediately agreed, accepting the assignment he had received. Left alone, Mikhail assumed that his sight would never return and considered this a problem. Since the young man can still use his power, but due to his blindness, it is difficult to control it. Therefore, in the worst case, the use of the young man's ability may become more difficult. However, suddenly the younger gentleman's attention was drawn to the feeling of a stranger's presence, and assuming that this was an invasion, Mikhail warned of his dislike of uninvited guests. Upon hearing this, Liarte immediately revealed that she was not a murderer and was not a water awakened sent by Duke Elheim. The young man, coming closer, was surprised, as he felt not only the unusual smell of Elheim's water, but also a pure and magical aroma. And although the young man did not see anything, he realized that he was truly not in any danger. As soon as Liarte came out to Mikhail, he asked her how she found him. The main character ignored this question, but explained that she could help the young man remove the curse. And continuing, Liarte asked the younger lord what he would do for her if she could get rid of the curse and restore his sight. After these words, the young man kissed the heroine's hand and replied that he would do everything for her. Hearing this, the girl informed the younger gentleman that his condition needed to be checked first, and Mikhail gave Liarte complete freedom of action, since he has no reason to disagree with the person who will remove the curse from him. The main character was a little confused by this, but warned that she would then begin to remove the bandage. However, the girl was surprised by the knot being too tight, and the young man explained that he tied it that way so as not to constantly call for knights. But in fact, Mikhail himself can untie the bandage, but he doesn't want to say it. And although the younger gentleman does not see, he feels the very acute sensations of Liarte's gentle hands. And given his heightened sense of smell, the young man could clearly smell the pleasant scent of water. And as soon as Mikhail was left without the bandage, he remained sitting motionless and silent. However, the girl herself, having looked at the eyes of the younger gentleman, froze in shock because she realized that this was dark magic. Since dark magic is different from a regular curse, the 7 seals around it only enhance its effects. Hearing this, Mikhail wondered how a person from the Elheim family could know such a thing, since the Duke hated ancient dark magic. This question put Liarte in an awkward position, and she simply replied that it just happened that way. But earlier the girl simply read forbidden ancient books to help the family, not by force. This was at a time when the main character had not yet lost hope of receiving love from her family. Thinking about this, Liarte informed the young man that if he did not act right now, he would lose his sight forever. So first, she would try to remove 1 seal. While removing the seal, the girl realized that although she was using her power for the first time, she could control water, so this was truly her ability. Mikhail felt a majestic power penetrating him. And the younger master couldn't believe that there was a possessor of such a powerful force in the Elheim family. At this point, the main character finished and told the young man about it, to which he noted that he felt a little better. And Liarte warned that it would be difficult for the body to withstand the removal of all the seals at once, so she would remove them one by one. After these words, the girl put on her cloak and said that she would try again tomorrow. Hearing this, Mikhail noted that although he did not know Liarte's name, he would wait. The main character herself said goodbye and immediately headed for the exit. And as soon as the young man was alone with himself, he tried to understand why Liarte attracted him so much. In a past life, half of Elheim's territory was mired in war thanks to Mikhail Birsche. Duke Elheim, who found himself in a desperate situation, confessed that because Birch's curse was ridiculed and ignored, Mikhail decided to take revenge. The man told Liarte that her death would awaken the Spirit Stone and provide Leon with power, and then they would be able to confront Bircha. However, the real owner of the Spirit Stone is the main character, not Leon. And if Elheim himself had known about this, he would never have done this to Liarte. According to imperial laws, a minor nobleman from the awakened line belongs to the family until he comes of age. But then the child has the right to choose his own place of residence, and if the heroine keeps everything a secret, she will become free. At this moment, Leon came to Liarte to check on the consequences of the attack and her well-being. However, the main character answered her brother that it was absolutely none of his business. And this made the young man a little angry, because he did not understand why, despite the fact that Liarte had gotten better, she continued to behave like this. But after thinking about it, Leon still explained to the girl that her health was the most important thing to him. However, the main character was not surprised by this, and she assumed that this was all because the young man would not be able to use his power normally without her. This made Liana even more angry, and, exhaling, he noted that while Liarte was unwell, she should not stay in the stuffy room, and now this was her only task. After these words, the young man left the room and realized that the heroine had changed. But Leon didn't understand what had changed on Liarte's side since she had shielded him from the killers. After all this time the main character did nothing but please the young man. Suddenly, the young man's thoughts were interrupted by Lionel, who had been looking for him for a long time in order to inform him about the strengthening of the Spirit Stone's radiance. Having reached the stone, the young men stood and looked at it, and Leon asked how long it had been sparkling like that. And Lionel said that everyone says that the stone has been like this since dawn. Hearing this, Leon put his hand on the Spirit Stone, but he felt nothing and panicked, because the young man began to doubt that the stone was really reacting to him. The main character came to Mikhail again, and he immediately greeted her. Liarte herself took off her hood and also greeted the young man, calling him by his first and last name. And after these words, Mikhail asked the girl if she was tired of calling him that, to which she replied that she could address him as young Mr. Birsche. However, the young man smiled and, disagreeing, explained that Liarte could simply be called by his first name. The main character thought about this for a bit and accepted the offer to call the young man by his name. Mikhail was very surprised that Liarte was not at all embarrassed and tried to understand whether she was cold-blooded or smart. The girl was interested in the condition of the younger gentleman's eyes, to which he said that it was getting better, since until yesterday it was painful for him even to look at the light. Hearing this, Liarte was delighted, and, taking the young man by the face, she said that today they would remove another seal. The young man himself became a little worried and his hands began to shake. And the main character, seeing this, touched Mikhail's hand with words that he should not worry and believe her, because Liarte will definitely restore the younger master's sight. Mikhail was surprised that the girl was so small that he could wrap his arms around her entire body, but at the same time she was trying to calm him down. The young man also could not believe that Bircha would be told something like that. However, after thinking everything over, the young man still answered the main character that he believed her. After all, Liarte is the first person who really interested Mikhail. After a few minutes, the girl finished and asked the younger gentleman if it hurt. And to this, the young man replied that he did not feel even a little pain, thanks to Liarte's care. Mikhail himself again felt the girl's powerful strength, but he realized that his interest was connected not only with this. The main character immediately breathed a sigh of relief, as she was very afraid that the young man would be hurt. And Mikhail, being the infamous Bircha, was surprised that the girl treated him like a lamb that she was obliged to protect. And the young man really wanted to see Liarte with his own eyes and find out what expression she had on her face. After thinking about this, the young man took a strand of the heroine's hair and said that he would definitely repay her for her kindness, and also asked her if she would tell him her name when she lifted the curse. The girl was surprised by this question, as she thought that Mikhail had already found out everything about her. However, the younger gentleman responded negatively to this and explained that he had not even planned to find out anything. After all, if the owner of the mighty power of water is unknown to the public, then there is a reason why he should not be introduced to the whole world. Therefore, if Liarte does not tell Mikhail anything about himself, then he will not find out anything himself. But the young man was sure that someday the main character would tell everything. And the girl, thinking that the younger gentleman was very caring, replied that she would definitely tell him everything before his sight returned. Already during the day, since Lian said that she could move around at this time, Liarte went to the library for a book about water abilities. The heroine was surprised that before her rebirth, she had only heard bad things about Mikhail, but in reality he turned out to be much friendlier, and she assumed that her new life had somehow influenced this. However, in any case, the likelihood that the girl would receive help increased, and she considered it luck. Looking at the shelves, the main character realized that she had not been to the library for a long time, although she used to come often. After all, Liarte was hiding in the library from her relatives, who hated the unawakened. But the girl stopped coming after her father discovered her. Now Liarte was looking for a book about water-awakened ones, as she wanted to read about healing methods for Mikhail's sake. Because the more seals the main character removes, the more difficult it is for her to control the power. However, the girl's attention was suddenly drawn to a silhouette standing behind her. It was Viamin Elheim, who immediately greeted Liarte awkwardly. Liarte and Leon have 3 older brothers, Lionel, Tandarian, and Viamin. The main character and Viamin are almost the same age, so they often played together before. The boys were timid and loved to read children, but one day their relationship fell apart. Viamin began to collect forbidden books in secret from his father, and at first Liarte did not understand anything and read them, repeating after him. Later, the girl studied books in the hope that she would help the family without her water power, but the children's secret did not last long. At one point, Liarte and Viamin heard steps in their direction, but did not have time to react in any way. As soon as the evil Duke entered the room, he immediately asked the children who dared to steal Elheim's books. Viamin immediately began to panic, and approaching his father said that it was not him. However, the man was not satisfied with this answer, and he continued to inquire about the identity of the culprit. And the boy, without thinking, pointed his finger at the main character, saying that Liarte had stolen the books. The Duke knew for sure that this was a lie, because the little girl could not have the strength to steal the forbidden powers. But knowing this, the man still punished the main character. And instead of a brutal beating, the Duke preferred to inflict injuries on Liarte with the power of water. After this, Viamin and the heroine could not communicate normally, and only when relatives were not around, he would just awkwardly throw words in her direction. From that moment on, the boy always asked Liarte only about his mood and the weather. And now, the young man approached the main character with the same purpose. So, looking away, Viamin awkwardly asked the girl how things were going for her. However, Liarte ignored this question and asked the young man how he dared to catch her eye. Before her reincarnation, that incident with the books caused the girl great trauma. The main character was very afraid of Viamin, but now she doesn't feel anything, because having experienced death, a person changes. And while Liarte was thinking about this, the young man said that he heard her lose consciousness due to the attack and explained that this was why he was worried. But the main character had already headed in the opposite direction, saying that she had no time for meaningless conversations. However, Viamin explained that he made a mistake as a child and always apologized to the girl because he was worried about her. Hearing this, Liarte turned around and said that the young man only thought about himself and wanted to get rid of the feeling of guilt. The heroine also noted that Viamin did not want to be a bad person, and that day he wanted to remain a good child in the eyes of the Duke, so he blamed her. The young man was at a loss and could not find the right words to answer. Liarte, however, continued, saying that there was no longer any need to apologize, since she would not even think of forgiving him. And as soon as the main character was about to leave, Viamin grabbed her hand with the aim of stopping her and talking. However, the girl immediately took her hand back and simply told her brother to continue being a good child. And then, Liarte called the young man a hypocrite and headed in the direction she needed. Already at night, Mikhail summed up the results of the investigation for several days and realized that during this time, only the spirit stone had awakened in Elheim's mansion. And Valto, standing opposite, bowed and confirmed these words. And when Mikhail asked for evidence, the young man said that he simply saw and heard about it. And also, during the investigation, he was on the verge of death several times. But having said this, the young man understood that despite his words, the younger gentleman would hardly believe him. Therefore, Valto was completely confident that Mikhail would send him to the duchy again. However, after a short silence, the younger gentleman calmly noted that nothing could be done about it and shocked the knight in the same way. At that moment, Mikhail praised Valto and asked him to ask his father in a letter about the spirit stone. The young man himself noticed the smile on the younger gentleman's face and, assuming that he was in a good mood, asked about it. And Mikhail confirmed these guesses with the words that the day had passed, which meant that the time had come for Liarte to arrive. Hearing this, Valto realized that this was about the awakened one who lifts the curse and is the reason for Mikhail's good mood lately. And realizing that it was almost midnight and he had to leave, the knight said that he would go and send a letter to his master. The young man continued to sit on the sofa waiting for Liarte, and his peace was interrupted by the feeling of strangers' presence. The younger gentleman stood up and expressed his dissatisfaction, as he wanted to sit quietly and peacefully for a few days. Mikhail himself understood that this did not look like Elheim's work, which meant that the people were sent by the one who cursed his eyes. And getting ready for a fight, the young man told the strangers that one dagger would be enough for them. Although in fact the young man believed that it would be easier to use his power, but then he would risk attracting Elheim. And if Mikhail used a gun, the sounds of gunshots would echo throughout the house, so he decided it was better to deal with it quietly. Trying to strike and dodge, the younger gentleman tried to understand the purpose of the customer who sent the people. After all, Elheim never lets down its vigilance on its territory. But since the killers still got to him, Mikhail assumed that the customer intended to cause a quarrel between the Elheims and Bircha. And while the young man was immersed in his thoughts and the fight, the main character began to enter the room, addressing him. However, the younger gentleman blocked the door and, apologizing, explained that Liarte was a bit late since he was cleaning up and she needed to stand outside. But at that moment, all the killers instantly froze in place, and this shocked Mikhail. And a second later, the young man realized that the main character had done all this. Liarte herself looked at the young man and asked if he was okay. To this, the younger gentleman, smiling, responded with consent, but also made a remark because he told the girl to wait outside. After these words, the main character looked out and noticed that Mikhail was in danger, so she couldn't just stand there. And looking at the young man's face, Liarte became a little worried, because the girl noticed that the younger gentleman was wounded, and, touching the scratch, said that she would heal it when they settled everything. Mikhail was very confused by this, because he did not expect that even in a room full of the smell of blood, Liarte was worried about him and wanted to protect him. The heroine's actions do not at all correspond to the young man's expectations and make his heart tremble. Having come to his senses, the young man prepared for a fight and noted that thanks to Liarte, it would be easier to deal with the murderers. Mikhail then asked the main character to stand behind him, as he would do everything himself. However, suddenly the hands of the hired people began to crack and crumble, and Liarte, noticing this, was horrified and stopped the young man, asking him to wait. Mikhail immediately turned towards the girl, assuming that she had done it. But the main character herself was also confused, so she answered negatively, explaining that she did not use force. When only bones remained of the killers, Liarte came closer, and it seemed to her that they too were cursed. However, the girl immediately remembered that usually after a curse there are letters or patterns left, but here there is nothing like that, so perhaps this is ancient magic. Having thought it over, Liarte turned to the young man and said that although she didn't know exactly what it was, she didn't feel any magic right now. And Mikhail, realizing that the killers were no longer a danger, expressed his joy that the worst had not happened. After these words, the young man sat down on the sofa and, thanking Liarte, said that he would send knights to find out what had happened. Hearing this, the girl asked Mikhail to tell the knights to be careful. And continuing, the main character said that she would then begin to remove the next seal. As soon as Liarte started using magic, the younger master thought that she had already dealt with 2 seals. And realizing that there were only 5 seals left, the young man wanted time to stop. After some time, the man who created the killers looked at the bones with disappointment, saying that he knew they would not be able to maintain their shape. Crown Prince Lucas Franz then told his assistant to throw away the remains. Having accepted the assignment, the young man inquired about further actions with the puppets sent to Elheim, to which Lucas replied that he no longer needed them, so nothing needed to be done. After all, the Dukes of Birch and Elheim must begin to suspect each other, and it will not be easy for them to understand who is really behind this. However, the assistant reminded that he and the prince did not know the current situation of Mikhail, who was currently in the Duchy of Elheim. Hearing this, Lucas immediately asked the young man if he thought that Mikhail and the Duke had begun to cooperate. But the assistant immediately told the prince not to worry, since even Elheim would not be able to remove the powerful ancient curse so easily. The young man did not respond to this, but silently agreed, because he had put a lot of effort into this curse, and it would not be easy to remove it with Elheim's abilities. According to Lucas, only one person has a chance to remove the curse, and if we exclude the Duke, it is Leon. Having thought everything over, the prince turned to his assistant with the order to urgently find a reason and send a letter demanding a visit to the Duchy of Elheim. In the duchy itself, at the next meeting, the man asked his sons about the state of the Spirit Stone, and Lionel said that a bright blue color appeared, and the stone itself beats like a heart. Therefore, the young man was confident that awakening would happen very soon, and the young man believed that all this would undoubtedly happen, thanks to Leon. However, Leon himself did not even look up and thought about everything that had happened recently. After all, recently the young man approached the maid with the aim of finding out where Liarte had gone, assuming that she wanted to find him. But the girl then told Leon that the main character had not said a word about him. However, at that moment, the young man's father began to call him, and he immediately came out of his thoughts. Then, looking at the Duke, the young man asked him what had happened. And the man reminded Leon that he would soon be coming of age and that he should find a wife. After these words, Lionel took out a letter from the Crown Prince, who wanted to come for a visit. And continuing, the young man suggested to his brother that he ask Lucas for an engagement to Princess Ninian. To this, Leon noted that it made no difference to him who it was, and he considered Ninian a good candidate. Besides, the young man knew that the princess had liked him since childhood and that it was quite easy with her. However, Liarte was still the easiest for Leon to deal with. But now the main character had become different, and the young man did not understand where he had gone wrong. At this point, the Duke expressed his suspicions that no one objected to the engagement with the princess, and Lionel immediately asked his father when he would invite the Crown Prince. To which the man thought for a moment, and said that the opening of an event in honor of welcoming Mikhail Birche would soon take place, so then he would invite a member of the imperial family. At night, the duchy will hold a grand banquet, and during the day, hunting competitions. Time passed, and of the 7 seals on Mikhail, only 2 remained to be removed. The next day, the main character came to the younger gentleman and immediately began to remove the seal. Starting, Liarte warned the young man that this time the seal would be more difficult to remove and it would take a little time, and the young man replied that everything was fine, so the heroine should not hurry. The young man himself remembered the moment when he told Valto that now he could vaguely see shapes and distinguish colors. Hearing this, the knight, although happy, understood that Mikhail could only see a little, and asked him if it would be a problem to meet hired killers at hunting competitions. The young man knew that Duke Elheim hated Birsche, but he thought that he was slowly crossing the line by holding a hunting competition as a greeting to a blind man. However, the young man still found what was happening funny, because one day the younger lord will destroy the Duke, but for now he will treat it as entertainment. And while Mikhail was lost in his thoughts, he felt some strange sensations. Noticing that everything was becoming a little clearer, the young man assumed that the curse had been lifted. And the main character, whom the young man could already see well, immediately asked if he could see her. Mikhail himself froze in shock and could not believe what was happening. At that moment, Leyrate explained that she tried very hard, but didn't know if it worked. However, the young man did not answer or react in any way, so the heroine turned to him questioningly. But Mikhail, not wanting to look into the eyes and blushing, replied that everything was wonderful. After these words, the young man realized that he was very worried and needed to calm down. And turning his gaze to the girl, the younger gentleman said that he was glad to see her right away after the curse was lifted. Then Mikhail kissed the main character's hand, saying that Birsche would remember her as a savior since she had restored the heir's sight. After all, even though there was still 1 seal left, the young man believed that Liart would remove the curse completely. So, as Mikhail promised at their first meeting, he will do everything the girl wants. Hearing this, the main character thought about what she really wants, and Liart realized that she simply wanted to avoid repeating the regrets of her past life. However, the girl did not know whether she could cope alone, and was not sure whether Mikhail could help her. After thinking it over, the main character introduced herself, realizing that she was the disgrace of the Elheim Duchy, born unawakened and inferior. Therefore, Liarte immediately informed the young man that she wanted to free herself from the Elheim family. Mikael was shocked by this, and after being silent for a few seconds, he noted that the girl's name was very beautiful. And continuing, the younger gentleman also said that he would definitely help the main character to free herself. After some time, the young man actively talked about the fact that he was the heir of Birch, and the current head of the family was his father. However, noticing Liarte's complete lack of interest, Mikael came to his senses and assumed that he was talking a lot about himself. And then the younger gentleman invited the main character to tell something about herself. Hearing this, Liarte, in surprise, again said her name, but the young man noted that he knew it and asked her to tell him what she loved or hated. The girl was confused by this question, since she herself did not know what she liked and assumed that she loved animals. After these words, Mikael thought for a bit and asked the main character if she liked birds. And, hesitantly answering yes, Liarte realized that she knew nothing about herself. But at that moment, the young man called several little birds and asked the main character for her opinion. Continuing, the younger gentleman explained that Birch uses these birds to convey opinions. Liarte, holding one of the birds on her hand, replied that she seemed to like them. Seeing this, Mikael smiled and asked the main character when she was thinking of leaving the duchy. The young man then noted that if Liarte wanted, they could run away right now, but she said that she was a minor. And minor aristocrats cannot leave their families until they become adults, so if the heroine runs away now, Elheim will seize her based on the laws of the empire. Also, if Mikael and Liarte are not careful, the entire empire will rise up against Bersha. And while the girl asked the young man not to make such an expression on his face, as if he didn't see a problem in this, he himself was thinking about leaving this place after the hunting competition. But since the young man did not want to leave Liarte alone, he stood up and told her that they would leave the Duchy of Elheim on the day she came of age. And to this, the main character responded hopelessly that she would wait. After some time, Tandarian arrived in the Duchy of Elheim, who immediately noticed that nothing had changed. Lionel, seeing his brother, informed him that he was late. The young man himself was surprised to meet his brother, since he is usually always busy. And then Tandarian, smiling, asked about the location of the Spirit Stone. Tandarian is different from the usual awakened of the Elheim family. The young man hates the achromatic color of the Elheim's hair, so he dyes it and also went to the palace to guard Ninian. Lionel replied at that moment that the Spirit Stone was where it always was, and noted that since Tandarian was so interested in it, he should have come when he first received the letter. However, the young man explained that, as his brother knew, he was a very busy man, and while Lionel was irritated by his relative's behavior, he said that he first wanted to look at the Spirit Stone. As soon as the young men entered the room with the stone, they both froze in shock, and Tandarian asked the reason for such a strong glow. After all, if the young man had known how serious everything was, he would have definitely arrived earlier. However, Lionel also did not understand what was happening and explained to his brother that the stone did not glow so brightly. The awakened families of Elheim, even if they did not create water themselves, can control it, and this is called capture. But the water that fills this place cannot be controlled and it becomes stronger. So Lionel started to panic a little and tried to figure out what was happening to the stone. And at that moment, some silhouette began to clearly appear among the water. It was a young man who looked at the boys in surprise and asked them who they were. Over time, the young man began to become enraged and inquire about the whereabouts of the one who woke him up. Lionel, observing the stranger, did not understand what kind of creature it was, since people cannot achieve such power, which means it was a monster or a divine entity. Having thought everything over, Lionel asked the young man with apprehension who he was. However, this angered the young man even more, and he reminded her that his question was the first one. And after these words, an unknown creature lifted the boys into the air, squeezing them with water. Tandarian, from the pressure on his neck, began to turn blue and choke. At that moment, the young man revealed that he was Lord Ryder's 10th weapon and Durin's first contractor. Upon hearing this, Tandarian was shocked, as he realized that they were talking about the first owner of the Spirit Stone. And the young man, confirming the thoughts of the young man, noted that they usually call him the King of Spirits. After these words, the spirit assumed that the guys were distant descendants of Durin, because he felt that they had weak strength. However, the brothers only cringed in pain and remained silent, not answering the question. Seeing this, the young man let his brothers go down and once again asked about the whereabouts of the man who had woken him up. Tandarian knew that if they didn't answer, the spirit would actually kill them, since it was much stronger. Lionel, too, could no longer stand the tension, and shouting out that the person he needed was not here now, asked if he needed to be brought. But the young man thought about it and asked to bring Urin's receiver only in 3 days. And after these words, the young man went into the stone again, leaving the boys in great surprise. Tandarian immediately assumed that the spirit had fallen asleep and realized that his request had to be fulfilled the next day after the end of the banquet and hunting competition. At that moment, Lionel noted that everything that had happened should be immediately told to his father. After some time, the Duke stood near the door to the room with the stone, expressing his dissatisfaction with the fact that it did not open. And when his father said that at least one had to remain inside, Tandarian explained that it was dangerous. However, the Duke told his sons that they were simply chickening out, to which Lionel told them about the Spirit King's request to bring Durin's heir in 3 days. And continuing, the young man noted that if he came with Leon tomorrow, the door would certainly open. But the father himself had not seen the young man for a long time, so he asked about his employment, and Lionel said that he had been running after Liarte for the last few days, and even invited her to a hunting competition. The young man then expressed his suspicions that the Duke would not allow the heroine to go, but the man agreed with Leon's wishes, since the most important thing now was to hide the fact of the awakening of the Spirit King, especially from Bersha. The day of the hunting competition had arrived, and everyone was actively preparing for the start. At that moment, Valto and the younger gentleman were standing among the trees and looking intently at something. Mikkel's gaze was directed at the main character with Leon, who was conducting a dialogue with her. And the young man, watching everything, frowned because he did not like Brother Liarte. Suddenly, the young man's thoughts were interrupted by the Duke, who inquired about his health. To which Mikkel replied that he was doing well and suggested that the hunt would be fun. The younger gentleman himself understood that his eyes were almost healthy and he had no problems with his vision because only one curse seal remained. However, the Duke does not know about this and hinted to Mikkel that he should simply stand and watch what is happening. And for the young man, this task was not difficult, but he had plans for the main character. Liarte herself sat alone in the forest, thinking about Leon's strange behavior lately. Because suddenly the young man invited the heroine to a hunting competition, although in his past life he had never done so. In addition, Leon said that he would get any game for the girl and asked about her wishes. But the main character didn't know who she wanted, and this made the young man angry, so he grabbed her hand and asked her to come up with something. Liarte was a little confused by this, but replied that she wanted a silver fox and the young man should not kill it. Liana was shocked by this, however, letting go of his sister's hand, he said that he would definitely keep his promise. Liarte specifically asked for an animal that was difficult to catch, but she still didn't understand what her brother was thinking. Even before her reincarnation, the main character wanted to hear something like this from Leon, but now he's just annoying. At that moment, someone suddenly called the girl by name and thus attracted her attention. It was the younger gentleman who looked at Liarte with a smile. And while the young man was sitting down, the main character asked him how he knew that she was there. To this, Mikhail said that he simply thought that if he came to this place, he would definitely meet Liarte. However, in reality, the young man was following the girl's wonderful scent, spreading in the wind. And thinking about this, the younger gentleman suddenly smiled broadly and caused the heroine to have a misunderstanding. But then Liarte asked Mikhail about the condition of his eyes, to which he replied that everything was fine now. After these words, the young man pointed to the girl's hand and suggested that it hurt. However, the main character denied this, as she was already used to this, but Mikhail didn't like this, and said that you can't get used to it. And also the younger lord would be glad if Liarte did not get used to pain. Hearing this, the main character was at a loss, because she didn't know what to say in such a situation. So the girl simply decided to ask Mikhail the purpose of his visit, to which he replied that he simply missed her. Lyra thought because other people saw her as only unawakened, and Mikhail was looking for her in this huge forest. And the main character was surprised that the younger gentleman cared about her. So, after thinking about it, the girl expressed her joy at Mikhail's arrival. The young man himself did not expect to hear something like this from Liarte, and blushed deeply, trying to find the words. As a result, the young man simply stood up, assuming that it was time for him to go. Then the younger gentleman asked the main character if she would be at today's banquet. Hearing this, the girl immediately remembered Leon's invitation to come to the banquet. So after a second, Liarte agreed on the condition that Mikhail would also be present. The young man was delighted by this and also told the main character that he wanted to dance with her. However, the girl immediately warned that she did not know how to dance, but Mikhail did not see a problem in this and said that he would teach her. At this time, Leon walked through the forest and looked for the one his sister wished for. And suddenly, the young man's attention was drawn to a tuft of wool that was lying on the ground. Before this, the young man told his family about his goal, to which the brothers reacted with shock, and Tandarian assumed that he simply loved foxes. The Duke warned his son that he had chosen a very difficult prey. However, Leon ignored this and asked his father what he knew about silver foxes. And the man said that this was a species that was exterminated by order of Elheim's ancestors, and almost all died out. Now, looking at the tuft of fur, Leon assumed that it was a silver fox, the last one remaining in the duchy. And, having understood this, the young man decided that he would definitely catch the fox and hoped that Liarte would then become her former self again. At that moment, some rustling was heard from the bushes, which the young man immediately noticed. Without delay, Leon approached the source of the sound and carefully peered behind the vegetation. It was the same silver fox that was the young man's target on today's hunt. Upon seeing the animal, Leon immediately became happy and was about to come closer. However, suddenly a loud shot rang out from which the fox screamed and wanted to run away. A second later, the animal simply fell to the ground, and the young man, watching this, was horrified and assumed that his target had been killed. But upon closer inspection, Leon realized that the fox had simply lost consciousness because it was frightened by the shot. However, at this time, another person approached the animal and shocked the young man in the same way. Seeing who exactly had come, Leon frowned and asked what he was doing. It was Mikhail who had already raised the fox to ask what the problem was. Continuing, the younger gentleman pointed out that Leon's hunting skills were not enough, as even he had done better. After this, Mikhail began to leave and warned the young man that next time he should think ahead, because Leon never knows when something will be taken away from him again. At this time, the main character was sitting in her room, thinking about the gift from her brother. Leon brought Liarte a dress to the banquet, but she didn't even open the box. In her past life, the girl never had a formal dress, and after her reincarnation, a lot really changed. But the main character did not understand why. Since something like this had never happened before, the future had changed. Having opened the box, Liarte noticed that the dress was beautiful, but she didn't know if the old her would have liked it. Looking in the mirror, the girl noticed unkempt hair and an old gray dress. However, realizing that her past self would not have felt any regret, Liarte found it all funny. After all, now for her own sake, the main character will write the future. The evening came after the hunting competition, and all the guests began to arrive at the palace. Ninian, getting out of the carriage, immediately began waving to Leon and actively calling him. Then the princess approached the young man, and embracing him by the hand, noted that they had not seen each other for a very long time. The young man smiled and greeted the girl with joy. And then, Leon turned his gaze to Lucas with words of gratitude for the visit. The ball itself was in full swing and everyone present was having a great time. The guys also decided not to linger, so after a couple of minutes they joined everyone else. The princess was immediately noticed by Tandarian and the rest of the brothers, who expressed dissatisfaction with the fact that she did not even greet them, but immediately stuck to Leon. Ninian ignored this, but told the boy that this image did not suit him at all. At that moment, Lionel approached the crown prince and, bowing, thanked him for his visit, to which he noted that they had not seen each other for a long time. Lucas also said that he had received the previous gift, and the young man replied that this was the least they could do for him. After these words, the prince asked whether hunting competitions had really taken place during the day, and Lionel confirmed this, noting that the competition ended successfully. However, Lucas noticed that despite the fact that the young man was saying that nothing had happened, the opposite was evident on his face. But without understanding the reason, the young man remembered Mikhail and became interested in his location. The younger gentleman himself stood calmly near one of the columns, not making contact with anyone. And the crown prince, having examined Mikhail, smiled because he realized that everything was in order with the curse. At that moment, Lucas's sister came up to him and asked him what he was thinking about. To which, laughing, the young man replied to Ninian that he thought how sorry he was to give her in marriage to Leon. The princess moved closer to Lucas and said that Leon was not in a very good mood today. After all, the girl simply asked the young man if his sister would come, since she considered her very beautiful and wanted to be friends with her, and he immediately became gloomy. And Lucas, although he didn't answer, mentally noted that this was precisely why the Duke hated Liarte. And also the man does not love his daughter because she is similar to his most beloved heir, but is not awakened. And while the young man was thinking about this, everyone present saw something and was very surprised. Lionel, noticing the faces of everyone else, turned around in confusion to understand the reason for such a reaction. It was the main character, who finally put on the dress given to her by her brother and was already going down to the guests. The Duke was very surprised by his daughter's appearance, so he froze in shock. And Lionel saw his mother in the main character and was even more shocked while she was simply apologizing for being late. Ninian's eyes sparkled with delight because she didn't know that Liarte had changed so much. Viamin, watching his sister, began to stutter because it was the first time he saw her in such a dress. Tandarian agreed with this and also noted that Liarte had impeccable posture and behavior like the ideal daughter of an aristocrat. Lian thought about it at that moment and remembered that his sister was a small child, desperately hiding the fact that she was not awakened. Liarte always craved love from her family even if they treated her poorly. And the more the heroine hoped to fit into the family, the funnier Liana became, so he treated her more and more coldly. But now the young man did not understand why Liarte was looking at him with such icy eyes. Having thought everything over, Lian approached his sister and extended his hand in an attempt to invite her to dance. However, suddenly Mikkel stood in the young man's way, asking Liarte to do him the honor of dancing with her. Lian froze in horror at this and immediately remembered the younger gentleman's warning that he should think ahead so as not to lose anything else. The main character thought for a bit and, smiling, accepted Mikkel's offer. Lian didn't expect such an answer from his sister and continued to stand there, upset. During the dance, the girl asked Mikkel if he liked the current song, to which he said that he liked it before. And then the younger gentleman noticed that Liarte was very beautiful today, and she thanked him and reciprocated. Then the main character turned her gaze to Lucas, who looked back and smiled. In their past lives, the imperial family dealt with ancient magic and potions. The assassins who arrived at Elheim's banquet that time, Mikkel's deprivation of sight, his turning into powder by ancient magic. They are all connected. After all this is an ancient power that cannot be used unless you are a member of the imperial family, which means they are behind it all. Thinking about this, Liarte assumed that the crown prince had come today to verify Mikkel's curse. Then the girl asked the younger gentleman if he could dance so openly. After all, the culprit of the young man's curse was in the hall, and Liarte believed that he needed to be more careful. Mikkel was shocked by this because he had thought to tell her everything when he got his affairs in order and did not expect that the girl already guessed everything. After these thoughts, the young man replied that he didn't care because Lucas was convinced that he didn't see anything. And instead, Mikkel told Liarte to come to Birche when she came of age. And the younger gentleman also invited the main character to go with him. At this time, Leon was watching the guys from the side, clenching his fist in anger, and the young man decided that he would never allow Liarte to leave the Elheims. Therefore, when Leon grows up and takes the place of the Duke, he will forever bind the main character to the dukedom. After a certain amount of time, Ninian said that her legs hurt and suggested that Leon finish dancing. And turning her gaze from the Lucas family to the Duke, the princess noted that it was very exciting to watch them talk about their engagement. The crown prince himself asked the man whether he should send the engagement papers, and just as the Duke wanted to agree to this, his own son interrupted him with a negative answer. Continuing, the young man asked to be heard first. Both the Duke and Ninian were shocked by this, trying to find out what had happened. However, Leon simply expressed his desire to get engaged after he came of age. Hearing this, Lucas agreed, as he believed that getting engaged at a minor age was not the best idea. The young man also told the Duke that he had a very serious and prudent younger son, to which he replied that Leon was also thinking about the princess. At that moment, the guys themselves, not wanting to listen to everything, had already turned around and headed for the exit. And Ninian, taking the young man by the sleeve, thanked him for having truly done this for her sake. However, Leon had no thoughts about the girl, but he was glad that he was misunderstood. It was important for the young man that the coming-of-age ceremony take place as soon as possible. After all, in the Elheim family, only water abilities are taken into account, and now Leon is the strongest awakened, so he will become the successor of the Duke. And then, the young man uses his power to prevent Liarte from escaping. The next day, the main character stood in one of the rooms, examining it. Passing by the piano, the girl noticed that she had not been in this room where the Duke raises children for a long time. Liarte immediately remembered the moments when her father called her to this place to punish her with physical force. And while the main character was lost in her thoughts, the Duke himself suddenly entered the room. Without further ado, the man reminded Liarte that she had danced with Bersha at the ball yesterday. So now the Duke is waiting for an explanation from his daughter. However, the girl did not understand what her father wanted to hear from her and asked why she could not dance with Mikhail. The man was confused by this question and did not know what to answer. After all, the Duke saw some changes in Liarte since she had always been a bullied child, and thinking about it, the man assumed that this was a new trick of the main character to attract attention. So the Duke immediately shouted a reminder of his dislike for Birch and told his daughter not to hope to attract his attention with this, because the man never treated Liarte as either a member of the Elheim family or as a daughter. However, the main character did not see a problem with this and replied to the Duke that she did not consider him a father either. The man did not believe what he heard and thought that Liarte could not have said that, because the girl always wanted to be part of the family and tried her best. And this is exactly the kind of child the Duke imagined Laerithe to be until now. Therefore, the man immediately turned to his daughter and asked if she understood what she was saying. And the main character, agreeing with this, noted that, as the Duke had said, she was not a member of the Elheim family. So Liarte doesn't understand why she should follow the rules and stay away from Bersha. Having said this, the main character explained to her father that all his words were quite contradictory. The Duke was very angry about this, and he asked Liarte if she realized what nonsense she was talking about. The girl recalled how every time she came to the disciplinary room, she listened to lectures until her ears hurt. This was the room of the Duke's wife, her favorite place in the whole palace. However, at that moment the man interrupted Liarte's thoughts with the words that she had killed her mother. After all, the Duke believed that the woman died because the main character was born unawakened. Liarte herself heard that the condition of the Duke's wife was not the best after the birth of 3 children, but at the same time, the woman gave birth to the main character with Leon and passed away. Coming out of her thoughts, Liarte asked the Duke if the woman had asked him to take revenge on the child who had killed her. However, the man was very confused and could not answer anything. Therefore, the heroine, not hearing an answer, said that if the Duke had nothing more to say, she would go. And after these words, Liarte really did leave, slamming the door behind her. The man was left alone with his thoughts and remembered how his wife admired Liarte's beauty and asked him to take care of all the children. But the Duke denied such thoughts, as he believed that the woman died because she gave birth without awakening. And such a child, in the man's opinion, will never become part of the Elheim family. And the Duke was also sure that Liarte would never awaken the power. The main character removed the last seal at night and told Mikhail that the curse was completely lifted. The young man immediately thanked Liarte, but noticing that she was in a bad mood today, asked what had happened. And the girl said that during the day, she briefly went into the disciplinary room. Hearing this, the younger gentleman immediately began to examine Liarte and exhaled when he realized that she had not been beaten. Then, realizing that he could put the heroine in an awkward position with interrogations, Mikhail said that she had not felt well at the ball either, so if she was tired, she could lean on him. However, the young man saw that he was being ignored again and felt awkward, but at that moment Liarte came closer and leaned completely on Mikhail, closing her eyes. The younger gentleman blushed deeply at this, not knowing what to do. Liarte also said that in the disciplinary room she told the Duke that she did not consider him part of her family. And after these words, the main character asked the young man if she was a good girl. Hearing this, Mikhail realized that for the first time the girl spoke about what was on her mind. Therefore, hugging Liarte, the younger gentleman said that she was smart, since there was no need to try for the sake of a person who did not appreciate her. Then the young man asked the heroine if he could find out what the Elheims had done to her. At this, the girl was a little confused and noted that she didn't even know where to start. In the end, Liarte decided to first talk about the most difficult memory from her life. In early childhood, the main character lost consciousness, and when she came to, she found herself all alone at a mountain house. The girl was given enough food, but she was always alone. And now Liarte assumed that they simply wanted to hide her from prying eyes and not kill her. After a long time, the Elheims took the girl away, but only to use her as a tool for Leon's abilities. And without this reason, the main character would have lived her whole life in that mountain house. However, Liarte thought that perhaps it would be better for her to stay and live in the mountains, because the girl was punished without reason, and it was very difficult for her to live in constant ridicule, anger, and indifference. So the main character always tried her best to get the love of the family and become a part of it, even though she was used. But now Liarte is absolutely indifferent to everything connected with the Elheims. Mikael, having listened to the girl, could not stand it and hugged her very tightly. The main character was a little confused, so she turned to the young man questioningly, and the younger gentleman said that he would definitely free Liarte from the Elheims. The main character didn't expect to hear this and was a little taken aback. However, a second later, hugging Mikael back, the girl thanked him. After this, the young man pushed Liarte away from him and asked if she had anything she wanted to do when she escaped. And the main character answered that she wanted to see the sea because she always thought that it would be nice to look at it at least once before she died. Hearing this, Mikael called the girl stupid because he believed that it was too early for her to think about death. But then the young man swore in the name of Birch that on the day of Liarte's coming of age he would definitely take her to the sea. At this time, standing at the entrance to the room, the Duke expressed his joy that the day of meeting with the King of Spirits had finally arrived. So, without delay, the man asked Lionel to open the door. As soon as the door opened, everyone went inside and began to walk deeper into the room. The Duke was shocked by what he saw, because when he first heard about the awakening of the Spirit King, he could not even imagine the scale of his power. And now the man was convinced that this superior power undoubtedly belonged to the King of Spirits. At that moment, Lionel knelt down and, turning to the King of Spirits, announced that they had brought the true owner of the stone. However, looking at Leon, the spirit immediately made it clear that he could not wake him up. And from this, the young man began to get very angry, and everything around him became covered in ice. Then the Spirit King called it all nonsense and said that it was not Leanne. After all, the young man believed that this creature could not wake him up at all. And continuing, the King of Spirits added that the Elheims had deceived him, since they had brought a fake. So everyone in the room should die now. Hearing this, the Duke immediately said that they did not understand what the young man was talking about, because Leon was definitely the owner of the Spirit Stone. The spirit, looking at the panic, realized that the family really didn't understand anything. However, the Spirit King senses that there is a true master of the Spirit Stone in this mansion, and the Elheims must bring him. After listening to everything, the Duke knelt down and replied that everything would be done. But in fact, the man panicked even more, because now he did not understand who was the owner of the Spirit Stone. Afterwards, all the strong awakened families were brought to the Spirit King, but he only replied that it was not them. And the Duke could not understand where he had gone wrong, because until now he had difficulty believing that Leon was not the master of the spirit. Lionel, standing in his father's office, noted that, just in case, it was worth checking even the younger awakened ones. And noticing Leon's tension, the young man told him not to worry, because even if he was not the owner of the Spirit Stone, he was still a future duke. At that moment, the man asked Tandarion if he would return to the imperial palace, to which he replied that since the princess had already left, it was time for him to go too, and he would return before Leon's coming-of-age ceremony. Suddenly, the family's conversation was interrupted by a servant who announced that Birch was about to leave. The Duke was surprised by this news because he thought that Mikael would stay in the palace for a long time. But Leon didn't react to this in any way, but looked thoughtfully towards the servant. At this time, Mikael himself was already approaching his carriage, where his assistant was waiting for him. Valto, noting that there was still time, asked the younger gentleman whether it was necessary to leave so early. And the young man agreed, since the curse had already been lifted and much preparation was needed, because Birch is about to meet the main character. Suddenly, the young man's dialogue was interrupted by Leon, who said that he had come to see them off. Hearing this, the younger gentleman smiled and remarked that it was a great honor. And thanks to Leon, Mikael's road will be smooth, and thanks to the care of the Elheims, there was not a single boring day. The young man, turning his gaze to the fox, asked Birch if he was taking her with him, to which the younger gentleman, already beginning to enter the carriage, replied that he always takes his things with him. And finally, Mikael told Leon that they would see each other again. However, the young man thought otherwise, and said that he was unlikely to meet Bersha again. And Leon also added that Mikael and Liarte will not see each other again either. After these words, the younger gentleman smiled, as he realized that the Elheims would definitely see him again. Several months have passed since Mikael Bersha's departure. Nothing special has happened since then, except that Leon changed Liarte's room for another. And the main character considered her new place of residence to be an ordinary room of an aristocrat. Suddenly, the girl's thoughts were interrupted by a man who entered her room without knocking. Seeing that it was Leon, the main character asked him the purpose of his next visit. However, the young man believed that he did not need a reason to visit his sister. Continuing, the young man recalled the coming-of-age ceremony and asked Liarte if she wanted anything. But the girl, without even turning towards her brother, replied that it was his ceremony and she did not understand why he needed to know about her wishes. However, Liana was irritated that the heroine did not take her eyes off the window at all, and assuming that Liarte was going to leave the palace, the young man said that he felt uneasy every time she constantly looked out the window. But the young man also warned that if the main character wants to escape, then this will never happen. And even if the girl dies, she will meet her death in the Duchy of Elheim. Liarte was tense at first, but remembering Mikhail's words, she realized that this time her brother was wrong. So the main character will never repeat that life again. In the Imperial Palace, Ninian walked around and actively searched for Tandarian, assuming that he had gone somewhere again. At that moment, the young man himself suddenly appeared in front of the girl, asking if she had called him. Frightened, Ninian immediately began to get indignant and asked the young man where he had been, to which he replied that he had just been out for a walk. And Tandarian also said that the girl's words upset him because he helps the dear princess, even being unnoticed. Then the young man turned his gaze to the crown prince, who was talking to someone. Ninian didn't notice anyone and began to tell the young man about the new servant who had arrived today. However, Tandarian himself, using his ability again, evaporated right before the princess's eyes and thus angered her. As he walked down the stairs, the young man noticed that Leon's coming-of-age ceremony was coming very soon. After these words, Lucas came to his senses and replied that Ninian would be happy to hear this. And after some time, the young men reached the right door. As soon as the count entered the room, he froze in shock, looking up. And the crown prince at that moment explained that this was half of the Spirit King, passed down in the imperial family from generation to generation. And Lucas wants to make the Spirit King complete and take full possession of his power, so that even the awakened ones could not influence the absolute imperial power. Hearing this, Count Fedez expressed his confidence that everything would be so. And after Lucas asked for the bottle, the young man became worried and asked him if he really wanted to collect everything himself today. To which the young man reminded that people with crimson eyes are not affected by the powers or curses of the awakened. However, despite this, while the prince was doing what was necessary, the count asked him to be more careful. This black pollen has a special power, so just breathing it or touching it is enough to make a living being completely lose their mind. After a couple of minutes, the crown prince finished with the suggestion that this would be enough. As he was leaving, Lucas asked the count about Birch's condition, and he said that he was still sitting quietly behind the closed gates. To this, the prince noted that the heir of Birch had gone blind, which meant that the old man would never see a bright future, and he deserved it. At that moment, after making sure that everyone had left, Tandarian removed his invisibility and appeared in the room. And the young man was shocked that the crown prince was hiding another Spirit King. The day before the coming-of-age ceremony, preparations were in full swing. Suddenly, Tandarian burst into the room asking if the owner of the Spirit Stone had been found. To which the Duke said that they had brought all the awakened to the stone, but there was no result. The young man was a little confused by this, because he had come supposedly to watch Leon's ceremony. But in fact, he wanted to find out the situation with the Spirit King. But everything was the same. Tandarian himself did not sense the same water power from the Spirit Queen as he did from the king, but he believed that the two were worth keeping a close eye on. At that moment, Leon asked the Duke about his plans for Liarte when she came of age. Hearing this, Lionel was shocked, as the young man was talking about the heroine again, and he noticed that he had been strangely obsessed with her lately. But the Duke explained that if, after reaching adulthood, Leon could use her power without Liarte, then she would no longer be needed, so he was thinking of kicking her out of the family. However, the young man immediately objected and thereby silenced his father. Continuing, Leon said that the main character needed to be kept close to him. But the Duke reminded the young man that if Liarte wanted to leave the family when she became an adult, then by law she could not be held back. However, Leon believed that the girl could be locked up because he did not understand how she had rights if her father had previously said that she belonged to him. These words made Lionel a little nervous because he no longer recognized his own brother. Tandarian agreed with Leon and said that if Liarte did not obey, then she should be beaten so that she could not escape. The young man believed that his brother should break the heroine, and then she would stop trying to get out. However, listening to all this, Lionel realized that Tandarian was still convinced that Leon was the owner of the Spirit Stone. But Lionel remembers how the Spirit King called his brother a fake. And when other awakened ones were brought, the spirit simply said that they were not suitable, but only Liana was called a fake. And in the end, Lionel realized that now nothing could be changed at all, so he agreed with Tandarian. That same day, at night, the main character went outside to find out something. After all, Liarte understood that tomorrow was Leon's ceremony, and before that she had to find out everything. The girl had seen how the awakened Elheim were brought to the temple to the Spirit Stone recently, so she was sure that something had happened. Standing in front of the door, the main character realized that only a direct descendant of the awakened ones could open the door. And thinking about this, Liarte hesitantly reached for the handle, and when the door finally opened, she was very happy. After just a couple of seconds, the girl stood in front of the Spirit King and looked at him in surprise. After all, the main character noticed that the spirit looked like the man she saw before her reincarnation. The king himself, sensing Liarte's presence, opened his eyes and instantly reached out to her. The young man also immediately expressed joy at the heroine's arrival, calling her his mistress. Continuing, the Spirit King reminded the girl that she had made a contract with him. However, Liarte replied that nothing like this had ever happened. And the young man, hearing this, decided not to hesitate, so he touched the main character's hand and showed a special sign. The girl was in great shock from what she saw and could not find the words. The king explained that this was a sign that Liarte had engraved on her soul so that he would recognize her even when she was reborn, since they had promised to meet again. Therefore, the main character is the reincarnation of the true mistress, Uren. Liarte was surprised by this information, and after asking again, found out why exactly this information. At this, the King of Spirits took the girl by the hand with the purpose of reading her memories. And a second later, the young man noticed that he wouldn't mind killing those inadequate people from the Elheims who had offended the heroine. After all, the family does not know the true owner and clings to the fake. Therefore, if Liarte wishes, the Spirit King will immediately kill all the Elheims, since he has the power to wipe the entire empire off the face of the earth. However, upon hearing this, the main character panicked a little and abruptly refused the offer. Since these people are worth nothing to the girl, and she will leave this place tomorrow, and the spirit must keep their meeting a secret. After these words, the young man suggested that Liarte would go to Bircha, to which she responded positively. Continuing, the Spirit King expressed his desire to travel with the heroine, but explained that he had split into 2 parts long ago and sealed them. So now, if the king leaves here, the seal will be destroyed. And just as the main character wanted to know more, someone behind the door began to discuss the voices inside, assuming that the Duke had arrived. So Liarte immediately said that she needed to leave, and the Spirit King agreed, saying that he would tell her more in detail next time. And even though the young man cannot go with the heroine now, he wishes her happiness. At this, the girl smiled and noted that they would meet again with the spirit. The Spirit King himself considered the Elheims fools, since they would regret it when they found out what they had done with their own hands. And so, a few hours later, the day of the coming-of-age ceremony arrived. The main character was beautifully dressed, but stood apart from everyone. Viamin, looking at Liarte, was very surprised by her arrival and told his brother about it. However, Leon didn't see anything surprising in this because she and the heroine were twins, and this was also her ceremony. But Viamin pointed out that it was not necessary to assign knights to the girl, since she was not a criminal. And the young man explained that the main character often thinks about all sorts of stupid things. However, Viamin still said that this was all too much, since it was impossible to restrain a person who had already reached adulthood. And when the young man said that Liarte was their family, Leon asked him since when he considered her a member of the family. Feeling his brother's irritation, Viamin broke out in a cold sweat and apologetically agreed with him. After this, the young man quickly went to his father, informing Leon about this. The young man himself turned his gaze to the main character and immediately grinned. After all, Leon believed that this place was suitable for Liarte and that she should stand in the shadows, thirsting for light. At that moment, Ninian suddenly approached the young man, and smiling, the princess first of all congratulated the young man on his coming of age. To this, Leon smiled back and politely thanked the girl. Ninian was very glad that the ceremony had finally taken place and hoped that they would soon raise the question of engagement. However, the young man ignored the princess and began looking at his sister again. Liarte herself, having caught another glance at herself, was tense because he was tirelessly watching her. Also, the main character didn't like that Leon assigned guards to her under the guise of concern. And remembering Mikael's words, the girl was worried that he would not be able to help her. The Duke was talking to the other guests at that moment, but was interrupted by a servant. The man immediately inquired about the reason for the disturbance, and the young man reported the arrival of a carriage without an invitation. And when the servant suggested that it was Bercha, the Duke was horrified. And a couple of minutes later, Mikael entered the palace, glad that he was not late. The crown prince and princess were shocked by this. It was not time to look at their eyes. And noticing the absence of a blindfold on the younger gentleman, Lucas panicked a little as he began to guess that the curse had been lifted. The Duke immediately shouted and asked Mikael how he dared to invade the Duchy of Elheim. Also, adding, the man warned that the younger gentleman would definitely have to answer for his actions. However, the young man calmly explained that he had simply returned for what he had left behind. Liana was very tense about these words, and he asked again, but was ignored. After all, Mikael had already extended his hand to the main character, saying that he had come to keep his promise. And continuing, the younger gentleman invited Liarte to go with him to the Duchy of Birch. The girl, although she hoped for Mikael's arrival, was still very surprised. The young man himself also apologized to the main character for being late. And as soon as the young man wanted to suggest that Liarte go to the sea, Lian interrupted him. Using his strength, the young man restricted the younger gentleman's movements. And then Lian asked Mikael, who told him that he would be able to take Liarte. After all, the younger master has no right to touch what belongs to Lian. Therefore, having increased his strength, the young man directed it towards Bercha with the words that he must die. Seeing the water approaching Mikael, Lionel panicked and asked to stop. However, suddenly, Lian's power was blocked by someone a few centimeters away from the junior master. And all the Elheims were shocked by what they saw, absolutely not understanding whose power this was. But at that moment, the main character made a remark to Lian and told him to behave decently. Understanding everything that was happening, the young man became angry, and Mikael only looked at him with a smile. After these words, Liarte removed her power and headed in the direction she needed. However, Mikael stopped the girl by the hand and asked where she was going. And the main character explained that before leaving for Bercha, she had to do something. Hearing this, the younger gentleman let go of Liarte's hand, and she immediately approached the Duke. The man immediately began to talk about the strength of the main character, but she interrupted him. And continuing, the girl said that from that moment on she would sever all ties with the Duchy of Elheim. After all, Liarte has come of age, so now the family can't hold her back. For 21 years, including the time before her reincarnation, the main character lived in this hell, but now it has come to an end. At this moment, Viamin and Tandarian watched everything that was happening in horror, trying to understand what kind of power this was. And Liarte was glad that she would never again be someone else's thing. And having finished with everything, the main character turned to Mikael and said that they could go. The younger gentleman immediately agreed with this, and they headed towards the exit together. As she left, Liarte looked at the young man with warmth, thinking that she would soon see the sea. Already in the carriage, Mikael thought about everything that had happened and how the Elheims clung to the main character. Duke Elheim was on the verge of falling to his knees to stop his daughter, and Mikael believed that these fools, who did not realize the value of what they had, were not worthy of Liarte, because the main character is not an accessory for Lian. The girl herself could not believe that she had finally left the Elheim Duchy and told Mikael about it. The younger gentleman didn't respond to this in any way, and with a smile simply began to sort through the strands of Liarte's hair. At this, the main character looked at the young man in surprise, turning to him questioningly. And the young man said that he would definitely help Liarte forget everything that she experienced in that place. Continuing, the younger gentleman also added that he is always there. But suddenly the guys' dialogue was interrupted by the coachman, who announced that they had arrived. Hearing this, the young man turned to Liarte and asked her if she was ready. The main character was a little nervous, but still said yes. As soon as the carriage door opened, the girl looked at the sea with admiration. For Liarte, such views were beautiful and free. After some time, the main character was still standing on the shore, admiring the water. Mikael, standing behind, noticed that the sun had already set and assumed that the girl really liked the sea. And Liarte agreed with this, since the sea is much bigger and more beautiful than in the pictures from fairy tales. After these words, the main character thanked Mikael, expressing her joy that she met him. The young man blushed deeply at this and did not know what to answer. However, Liarte continued at this point and asked the young man to take care of her in the duchy as well. The younger gentleman did not respond to this, but came closer to the main character. And looking at the girl, Mikhail said that he missed her very much. To which Liarte, reaching out her hand to the young man, responded in kind. And then the main character suggested to Mikhail that they always be together and someday go to the sea again. Lian sat there wondering where he had gone wrong, assuming that the problem had been with Birch from the start. That's why the young man felt he should have realized this when Mikhail took his fox. And Lian also realized that he should have kicked out the younger gentleman back when he invited Liarte to dance. At that moment, the Duke approached the young man and looked at him sternly. The man then said that the coming-of-age ceremony, which was supposed to be the biggest celebration of the Elheims, ended like this. After these words, the Duke asked Lian if he had seen Liarte's power, since he himself had never encountered such powerful magic. The young man was very depressed and completely ignored his father, and the Duke, not hearing an answer, told his sons to follow him. Standing in front of the door, the man noted that they were about to find out what had actually awakened the Spirit King. However, the young man was not happy to see the Elheims, as he thought that it was the heiress of Uren who had arrived. Continuing, the young man expressed his strong desire to brutally kill everyone present in the room. Hearing this, the Duke panicked and asked the Spirit King to be kind to them. And then the man asked who really was the owner of the Spirit Stone. To which, changing his position, the spirit asked the Duke how the Elheim's will sounded to Uren. And the man began to tell that one day the true master would appear, awaken the King of Spirits and revive the power of the family. But the King of Spirits interrupted the Duke, saying that everything he had said was wrong and he would tell the real story of the will. During the life of Uren, the first mistress, the gates of the Spirit Stone opened, and then spirits moved freely on the earth and interacted with people. The spirits shared their power with those who made a contract with them, and such people were called owners. There were also those who made a pact not with ordinary spirits, but with kings, and such were called awakened. Humans and spirits got along well until one of the Spirit Kings fell and the gates were closed. Hearing this, Tandarian mentally assumed that this was about the creature that the prince was using in the basement of the imperial palace. The young man continued and said that after the fall, all the spirits returned to their world, and the awakened ones could not use their power. However, the Elheims retained all their strength thanks to Uren, and the beloved first mistress could not awaken her power until she came of age, just like Liratha, who was hated by the family. Having finished his story, the King of Spirits grinned and asked the Elheims how they felt after the departure of the true master, whom they had been waiting for so long. The young man also noticed that the fake was not Liarte at all, but the creature standing next to the Duke. And pointing his finger at Lian, the Spirit King called him an ominous and creepy fake. Later, the spirit said that the young man had completely sucked the life force out of his mother while she was still in her womb. And after birth, the young man lived happily, slowly killing Liarte. So now the Spirit King forbids the Elheims to use water power. Therefore, from this moment, when Liarte left the family, the Elheims will not be able to use their abilities. This made the Duke hysterical, and he could not believe what was happening. And falling to his knees, the man realized that the duchy needed to return the main character. After some time, Birch's carriage arrived at the palace, taking the boys home. The younger gentleman immediately began to gently wake Liard up, telling him that they had arrived. After waking up, the main character looked out the window to see what the Duchy of Birch looked like. A few minutes later, Mikhail got out of the carriage and helped the girl down, trying to warn her about something. However, at this point, Carmen interrupted his son, eagerly greeting Liarte. And after this, the young man, apologizing, explained to the heroine that his father really wanted to meet her. The girl herself bowed and, thanking him for the welcome, greeted the Duke in return. But the young man noticed a slight nervousness in Liarte, so he said that she did not need to strain herself so much. And Carmen agreed with this because they should take care of the girl and express gratitude. After these words, the man also kissed the main character's hand. And then the Duke thanked Liarte for restoring the sight of Birch's only heir. However, when Mikhail said that he was indebted to her, the main character denied it, since he helped her. Carmen, at that moment, was watching the guys and was smiling, so he didn't answer. But after a few seconds, the Duke invited Liarte into the house and also informed her that he had prepared something special for her. Hearing this, the main character was surprised and did not even imagine what was being discussed. Already sitting in her room, the girl admired its beauty and size. And although Liarte understood that this was natural for the duchy, she could not believe that this bedroom had been prepared especially for her. and remembering the Duke's words about another surprise after she entered the room, the heroine tried to understand what he was talking about. However, at that moment, the man standing behind the door announced that he had been sent by the Duke of Carmen. And as soon as Liarte gave permission to enter, a girl entered the room, introduced herself as Marilyn, and explained that from now on she would take care of her. The heroine immediately remembered that in her past life, when the Bircha attacked the palace and the Elheim Duchy, it was Marilyn who single-handedly dealt with hundreds of soldiers. And having made sure that it was indeed a girl, Liarte did not understand why they had assigned a hired killer to her. Marilyn herself said that perhaps her skills may not be enough, but she asks the heroine to take care of her. After all, the girl's main task is to protect Liarte, and she will do it better than anyone else. After these words, the main character understood everything, and in response asked Merlin to take care of her. Hearing this, the maid immediately smiled and said that first she would help Liarte get settled, so she would change her clothes and take her to the garden to meet the master. At this time, Mikhail and his father were sitting in the yard, drinking tea. The younger gentleman was waiting for the main character and looked at the door with impatience. The Duke, observing the young man, noted that they say that raising children is useless. However, Mikhail replied that there was nothing surprising in this, and Carmen, hearing this, called him shameless. But suddenly Birch's dialogue was interrupted by the person they had been waiting for. It was the main character, who had finished getting ready and was already out in the garden. Coming closer, Liarte immediately apologized to Birch for being late. The young man was shocked by the beauty of the heroine and, blushing, admiringly shouted out her name. And Carmen, seeing such a reaction, asked her son to let the girl sit down first and then invited her to the table. For Liarte, such a variety was surprising, and Mikhail explained that he did not know about her preferences, so he took a little bit of everything. And after these words, the younger gentleman told the main character to try everything as soon as possible. However, noticing that the girl didn't even plan to eat, Mikhail assumed that she didn't like that kind of thing. But Liarte responded negatively to this and explained that it was the first time she had seen such dishes, so she did not know how to eat them. And the main character will definitely try if Birchie tells her to. Mikhail was upset by this, but he smiled and said that the girl could learn everything little by little, and he would be there and teach her everything. And breaking off a piece of one of the desserts, the young man said that it was a roll, sweet, soft, and delicious. Then the younger gentleman handed Liarte a fork with a roll and asked her to open her mouth. And as soon as the main character tasted the dessert, she froze in admiration, saying that it was very tasty. Bircha, seeing a pleased Liarte, smiled and looked at her with warmth. The girl herself smiled back and expressed her gratitude in the same way. Already heading to the room, the main character thought that the tea party was amazing. Liarte tried chocolate and cakes for the first time. Everything was very sweet and delicious. That's why the girl didn't even notice how quickly time passed. However, suddenly the main character's thoughts were interrupted by a loud scream. And turning around, Liarte tried to understand where the source of the sound was. Just as the girl began to suspect that she had imagined it, the scream rang out again and she was convinced otherwise. However, the main character still did not understand where this scream was coming from. Noticing that Liarte had turned pale and looked worried, Merlin asked her what was wrong. And the girl said that she heard the roar of the beast, and then asked the maid if she had the same. To which Merlin responded in the negative and explained that they do not keep any animals in the duchy. And the main character, although she accepted this information, still looked around with caution. However, at that moment the maid told Liarte that they should return to the room, as it was already late. The girl immediately agreed with this and headed in the right direction. And at the same time, a fierce roar was still echoing through the corridor. Carmen, sitting in her office, read another letter of complaint and called the senders annoying. After all, the aristocrats led by the Elheims want to get Liarte. And for the Duke, this was to be expected, since the Elheims had lost their most powerful awakened of all time. Clutching the letter, Carmen asked Aleph how to properly perceive the intervention of the Crown Prince, and the man explained that it should be taken accordingly, because Lucas wants Birch to fall. The Crown Prince is one of the people who are willing to make a marriage proposal in order to attract the awakened one to his side. Hearing this, the Duke assumed that Lucas was thinking of marrying Liarte and considered this nonsense. After all, the child who had been mistreated in the duchy was finally free. And even if Liarte had not been Birch's benefactor, they would not have allowed her to return to that hell. After these words, Carmen threw away the letter, asking Aleph not to bring them to him anymore. To this, the man immediately bowed and accepted the order. However, the Duke remembered that he had forgotten to say something else, and again attracted Alepht's attention. Continuing, Carmen said that if anyone continued to write, the assistant should warn them that he would break their hands so that they would not be able to do it again. At this time, Liarte herself was lying in bed and thinking that it all seemed like a dream, and if the main character had not come to Bircha, she would not have been able to see so many amazing things. Therefore, remembering Merlin's words about how the Duchy of Birch was a warm home and a blessing for her, Liarte began to understand them. Once upon a time, Merlin was kidnapped by a group of hired killers and forever lost the opportunity to live a normal life. If this group had not been destroyed, the girl would still be suffering. And that day, Merlin said that Liarte would also like this place and she would live a normal life. That's why the main character was now actively thinking about these words, because she understood that the maid was happy to live peacefully in Birch's house. But in her past life, Merlin was a furious girl who killed even members of the imperial family, and Liarte did not understand what made her change. However, if the main character knew the reason, she would try to prevent it. Suddenly, Liarte's thoughts were interrupted by another loud roar, which immediately raised her from the bed. And approaching the window, the girl realized that she had definitely not imagined it, and she had to find out what it was. However, the guard standing on the street immediately noticed the main character and paid attention to her. The young man immediately turned to Liarte to find out the reason for going out so late, and the girl explained that she could not sleep, so she decided to take a walk, to which the knight expressed a desire to accompany her. But the main character immediately refused, noticing that the young man was currently at work. However, the young man said that they had a lot of security and there was no need to worry, and besides, Liarte was not yet used to the house, so he could not leave her. After these words, the girl agreed to be accompanied and thanked the knight. Looking around, the main character assumed that the source of the screams was nearby, and hearing another scream, Liarte immediately turned around. The girl immediately understood where the sound was coming from and decided that she needed to go there. Therefore, the main character suddenly jumped up from her seat, ignoring the young man who asked her not to go far. Approaching the door, Liarte was about to knock, but she was suddenly called and turned around. It was Duke Carmen who looked at the main character in surprise. Eventually, the man interrupted Liarte and they went for a walk together. The girl thought about the small mansion behind the main building and wondered what the Duke was doing there. Carmen himself noticed Liarte's gaze on him and, assuming that she had many questions, asked what she wanted to know. However, the heroine doubted that she would get an answer to everything, and the Duke confirmed this, but said that instead of an answer, he could give something else. The man then put his hand in his pocket and, taking out a candy, handed it to Liarte. But the girl did not understand what it was, and Carmen assumed that his explanation was not enough, and then said that it was candy. Continuing, the Duke said that this candy was as sweet as the chocolate that the heroine ate today. Liarte thought for a moment, but anticipating the taste of sweetness, she agreed and accepted the gift. And already holding the candy in her hands, the main character thanked the man a little awkwardly. At this, Carmen smiled and noted that everything was for their benefactress. After these words, the Duke reminded him that it was already midnight and asked Liarte the purpose of going outside. Hearing this, the main character was confused and was not sure that she could tell the truth. After all, Marilyn didn't hear that howl, which means there's a chance that Carmen didn't either. But still, Liarte decided that it would be nice to take a walk with Carmen, and answering that she simply couldn't sleep, suggested that he had some business in that house. And the man smiled at this, noting that the main character was right. And noticing Liarte's interested gaze, the Duke asked her not to look at him like that, because he couldn't tell her everything. After these words, Carmen snapped his fingers and called one of the knights with the same gesture. Continuing, the man explained that it was already very late and asked the guard to take Liarte to the room. Then the young man approached the main character and led her in the right direction. Carmen himself happily waved after the girl, saying that they would see each other again. However, Liarte was tense because the Duke had deliberately thrown her out and assumed that he was hiding something in that house. Already in the morning, the main character went out for a walk in the garden. And Merlin, standing nearby, asked Liarte not to go out for a walk so late anymore, as the master had asked her to convey this. The main character, although a little upset and tense about all this, listened. However, suddenly someone called the girl, and she, recognizing the voice, immediately jumped up from her seat. It was the younger gentleman who was approaching the main character with a smile on his face. Mikkel came up and said that he had heard that Liarte was in the garden, so he came and assumed that she really liked it there. To which the girl agreed and explained that when she is in such a large and spacious place, her mood immediately improves. And the young man, having already sat down next to Liarte, noted that he was very glad to hear that she liked it here. But turning his gaze to the main character's hands, Mikhail noticed the candy and asked where it came from. And the girl said that the Duke of Carmen had given her the sweet when they had met last night on a walk. Hearing this, Mikhail assumed that the Duke took the candy with the expectation that he would meet Liarte, since there was no one else in this place who would do something like that. At this, the main character looked at the young man in surprise and asked again. And the younger gentleman explained that his grandfather loved sweets very much, so even when he was not allowed to eat sweets, he always carried them with him. After these words, Liarte realized that of the Bircha family members, she had only met Mikhail and Carmen. However, at this point, Mikhail's grandfather, Aaron Bircha, should be alive, but was never mentioned by the servants, and the heroine did not see him in the mansion. The young man, noticing that Liarte had suddenly become gloomy, asked if everything was all right with her, and the main character told that yesterday she heard a strange scream. Continuing, the girl added that the scream sounded like the howl of an animal, and she thought it was coming from a small house behind the main building. Hearing this, the younger gentleman immediately looked in the direction of that house. And then the young man jumped up from his seat and asked the main character to stand up too. And when Liarte asked where they were going, Mikhail replied that since she was interested in what was inside that house, he would take her there. However, suddenly Merlin intervened in the conversation and told the young man that he should not go into that house because it was very dangerous there. And Mikhail, although he thanked the maid for her concern, noted that he was sad, since her words sounded as if she did not trust him. After these words, Merlin immediately apologized to the young man and bowed. The younger gentleman himself noted that the maid had no need to worry. And then the young man took the main character by the hand and led her in the right direction. Approaching the building, Mikhail began to open the door and asked the girl not to be too scared. The younger gentleman also told Liarte to hide behind his back if anything happened. Upon entering, the main character began to shake from the cold and tried to understand what was in this place. Mikhail touched the girl's shoulder and said that she shouldn't be afraid because he was nearby. At this, Liarte immediately smiled, thanking the young man. However, at that moment the boys' dialogue was suddenly interrupted by another roar, and they looked in shock towards the source of the sound. The main character, seeing a stranger, was horrified and did not understand why he was there. The younger gentleman looked sadly at the man and told Liarte that this was his grandfather, Aaron Birche. The girl was horrified by this information, and realizing that this was the head of the Birch family, she wondered what had happened to him. And Mikhail explained that his grandfather had completely lost his mind. But the young man does not know how Aaron became like this and how to help him, because several years ago he was healthy. The younger gentleman wanted to kill his grandfather when he first went mad, but the Duke ordered him to be kept locked up. Liarte, examining Aaron, noticed his red pupils and animal fangs. And after thinking it over a bit, the main character began to realize what exactly had happened to the head of the Birchi family. At the beginning of the First War declared by Bircha, the imperial family and the Elheims were confident of their victory, but as soon as the fighting began, they were all routed. And during the war, many feared only Mikhail Bircha, who was called the messenger of the devil on the battlefield. When everyone was horrified that Mikhail could not be stopped, the crown prince suggested using black pollen. Anyone who inhales the pollen will go mad, as it is a poison that turns a person into a mad beast. But then the prince failed to use the black pollen on Mikhail, because soon after this it was discovered that the awakened one could remove poison from the body. And Liarte remembered that in her past life, the only owner of pollen was the crown prince. So the girl considered it obvious that it was because of Lucas that Aaron Birch was exposed to pollen. However, while Liarte was analyzing everything, the head of the Bircha family began to try to break free, growling loudly. Seeing this, the younger gentleman immediately moved the main character closer to him so that she would not be hurt. At this moment, the assistants immediately ran up, asking Mikhail if everything was okay and also apologizing for leaving their post for reconnaissance purposes. And hearing from the younger gentleman that everything was fine, the young men breathed a sigh of relief. But one of the assistants, noticing Liarte, looked at her in surprise and asked Mikhail who she was. The main character herself, seeing such interested glances on herself, simply looked back questioningly. The younger gentleman asked the young men not to look at Liarte like that, as they were embarrassing her, and then told them to introduce themselves. After these words, the guys immediately bowed and greeted the main character. The young men also gave their names and explained that they were assistants to Mr. Aaron. Continuing, Hans explained that Aaron was a benefactor who saved them and Merlin, so after what happened, they could not leave him. At that moment, Mikhail noticed that Liarte had turned pale, so he immediately asked how she was. To this, the main character smiled and explained that she was just a little scared. The girl herself thought that if the crown prince had used black pollen, he had done so through Aaron's confidant. Therefore, Liarte believed that there was a high probability that one of these two assistants was a spy. At this time, the crown prince could not get rid of his irritation because of the main character. After all, if Lucas had known about the girl's departure to Bircha, he would have transferred her to the side of the imperial family in advance. Because even though the young man turned one city into chaos and ruined Mikhail's eyes, in the end, the curse he had worked so hard for disappeared. Suddenly, the crown prince's washing was interrupted by a knock on the door and words that a guest had arrived. However, the young man was angered by the fact that someone came to him without making an appointment, so he immediately called this person not very smart. But at that moment, the door suddenly opened and the count appeared in the passage holding his hand. The Duke of Birch followed the young man, noting that the prince had greeted him rudely. The young man himself was so shocked by Carmen's appearance that he was at a loss for words. And the man continued, reminding him who he was and greeting Lucas. Hearing this, the prince assumed that the elder Bircha had lost his mind and the other one had poor eyesight, even after acquiring the water awakened one. To which Carmen replied that Lucas had gone crazy because he couldn't get the water awakened. This angered the young man, and he warned that he would not tolerate any more insolence. However, the Duke noted that if the prince continued to send useless letters asking for the girl's release, he would not remain inactive. After these words, Carmen Bircha squeezed the count's broken arm, causing him to immediately scream. And then the man warned that the next letter he sent would end in more than just a fracture. Therefore, the Duke asks the prince not to force him to take stricter measures. Hearing this, the young man frowned and assumed that Carmen was now threatening him. However, the Duke explained that he did not dare to threaten the prince, so he was simply asking for a favor. Afterwards, the man bowed and expressed his hopes that these letters would not reach the Bircha mansion in the future. Then Carmen said goodbye to the crown prince and left silently. The young man himself immediately turned to the count, to which the latter, confused, prepared to listen. And continuing, Lucas said that he was obliged to correct Carmen's impudent habit, so he wanted the count to make Aaron Bircha desire his blood. After some time, the main character watched Merlin, thinking about the words of Hans and Andrel. After all, the young men said that Aaron had done a lot for them and Merlin, so they decided to protect him until the very end. But Liarte understood that Aaron could not inhale the black pollen on his own, and there were no people around him that he trusted. Therefore, the main character believed that the culprit was either Merlin or the man's assistants. At this moment, the maid interrupted Liarte's thoughts and noted that after returning from that house, the heroine did not look like herself. Therefore, the girl assumed that something was bothering Liarte, but she replied that everything was fine. However, Marilyn said that if she could help in any way, she would do everything she could. And the main character, after thinking a little, asked if she could meet the Duke right now. At this time, Carmen himself went to his father and greeted him. Continuing, the man said that he would definitely kill Iran today, despite the fact that it had to be postponed for a long time. But suddenly the Duke remembered moments from the past and how his father looked as the head of the Birch family. These memories immediately made Carmen sad and, letting go of the weapon, he assumed that he would not kill Aran today. However, the man's thoughts were interrupted by the familiar shadow of a girl on the floor. And seeing Liarte, the Duke noticed that his father had a guest today. The heroine, having said hello, told him that Merlin had said that she was not allowed to come in, but she had to tell Carmen something, so she broke the rule. Hearing this, the man assumed that the maid was trying very hard and also said that she was right, since when he was inside, no one was allowed to enter. After all, even Hans and Andrel leave their posts the moment Carmen arrives. After these words, Liarte apologized, but noticing the weapon in the man's hands, she was glad that she was not late. And continuing, the main character said that the madness of the head of the Birch family can be cured. Carmen was shocked by this and asked again because he did not believe that treatment was possible. And the girl, seeing the Duke's doubts, asked him if he trusted her. The man, after thinking for a moment, answered positively, since Liarte was the benefactress of the Bircha family. At this, the main character immediately smiled and thanked Carmen. After this, the girl went to Aaron, but the Duke asked her not to come so close because it was dangerous. But Liarte, having answered that everything was fine and there was nothing dangerous about it, began to use her power. In the past life, the Elheims learned about the poison's neutralization too late. However, thanks to the powerful power of the water awakened, madness can be cured. And after just a couple of minutes under Liarte's influence, the head of the Birch family calmed down and fell asleep. And the main character explained that the energy of water will soon make Aaron feel better. Carmen stood in shock at this time, continuing to not believe that his father could be cured. The man found this all surprising, so he asked Liart to explain what had happened to Aaron. And the main character replied that the symptoms were similar to black pollen poisoning. After all, pollen makes an ordinary person go crazy and die within a few hours, but those who are awakened completely lose their minds and turn into animals. And when Carmen asked where she knew all this from, the girl said that she read the information in an ancient book. And Liarte knows that a strong water awakened can neutralize the poison of black pollen. Therefore, the main character will use all her strength and heal the head of the Bircha house. Hearing this, the Duke asked whether his father would die, and the girl confirmed these words. Liarte also asked Carmen to keep everything that was happening a secret from his subordinates. At first, the man was shocked by this, but after a few seconds he noticed that the heroine was perceptive. After all, the girl also realized that Andrel, Hans, or Marilyn were involved in the poisoning of the head of the Bishra house. Liarte continued, explaining that it was still impossible to determine the culprit, but if the spy guessed, everything would only get more complicated. And Carmen, agreeing with this, said that the girl knew more about this disease than he did, so he relied on her. Hearing this, the main character thanked the Duke for trusting her. At this point, the man said that he would not be able to be there all the time during the treatment, but he also could not leave Liarte alone with Aaron. So Carmen decided to assign the girl a guard that he could trust. The next day arrived, and it was time for another stage of treatment for the head of the Birch house. The main character was already descending the stairs, heading towards Aaron. And at the very bottom, a younger gentleman was waiting for Liarte, who immediately offered her his hand. Walking with the young man, the heroine assumed that he was the guard assigned by the Duke. And the young man confirmed this guess, saying that he would always be there and protect Liarte. When the guys approached Aaron, the girl asked Mikhail to move away. And to the younger gentleman's objections, the main character replied that he shouldn't worry, since she would be fine. Liarte herself took out the candy and, although she was not sure about this method, showed it to Aaron. Then the main character quickly gave the sweet to the head of the Birchie house, noting that they could begin. This surprised the young man, and he asked Liarte how she came up with this idea. And the girl replied that the younger gentleman himself said that his grandfather loved sweets, and since madness could not completely change Aaron, the main character assumed that taste preferences should have remained. Therefore, now the head of Bircha is calm, while he eats candy, and at this time, Liarte will treat him. After these words, the main character focused on strength, asking Aaron to be patient a little. Watching the girl, the younger gentleman thought for a moment and turned to her with the words that she was already their benefactress. Therefore, Lirata does not need to help Bircha anymore, since they will protect and guard her anyway. However, the main character replied that Aaron is a very valuable person for the whole family, and she wants to help. The young man blushed deeply at this and continued to watch Liarte's actions with embarrassment. After some time, the girl finished and said that that was all for today. And approaching Mikhail, the main character said that it might take at least a week to remove all the poison. Until that moment, according to Larath, it is necessary to find the spy who poisoned Aaron Bersha. After some time, the girl walked around the garden and at the same time thought about what they poisoned the previous Duke with, since there are many ways. If the pollen was used for a long time and no one knew about it, then perhaps the main character will be able to find evidence in Aaron Birch's room. And as soon as Liart turned around, saying that there must be a way to get into the room, someone addressed her. As it turned out, it was Mikhail who was looking at the girl with a smile. Seeing the young man, the heroine asked how he ended up there, to which he replied that he was in the Tower of Roses, and seeing her, immediately came down. However, in reality, the younger gentleman came out through the balcony and greatly shocked the servants. Now the young man asked if Liarte was out for a walk, to which she responded positively, saying that she needed to think and go somewhere. Mikhail immediately became interested in where exactly the girl was going, and she began to talk about the evidence she wanted to find in the former Duke's room, and then asked permission to go there. Hearing this, the young man agreed without hesitation, noting that the heroine had every right to go to any part of the house. The younger gentleman also added that Liarte could go and do whatever her heart desired, to which the girl smiled and thanked him. After this conversation, the young man led the main character to his grandfather's room, which she so badly wanted to get into. Opening the door, Mikhail said that the girl could stay there as long as she wanted. Then the younger gentleman told her that about a year ago, her grandfather had gone mad. But Liarte noticed at that moment that, despite the fact that no one had used the room for a long time, it still remained clean. And the heroine became interested in whether nothing had changed in the room since then, to which Mikhail confidently replied that everything was the same as before. As the girl walked around the room, she noticed ancient books that were forbidden to read in the Elheim Duchy. And seeing the long-desired book, Liarte asked permission and was about to take it from the shelf when she realized that she couldn't reach it. Mikhail just laughed at this, reaching for the book instead of the heroine, and thus providing help. After this, Liarte turned to the young man and just wanted to say something, when she saw his face right in front of hers. The guy, noticing that the heroine had blushed, asked what was wrong with her face, to which she responded with bewilderment. The girl, due to the oppressive and awkward atmosphere, came closer to the younger gentleman to hug him. This made Mikhail feel embarrassed, and, stuttering, he tried to address Liarte, who continued to hug him. And as soon as the young man asked what happened, the main character replied that she did it because she liked him. Hearing this answer, Mikhail stood there in thought, but realizing what was happening, he smiled. Liarte asked if she was acting strangely, to which the younger gentleman calmly replied that there was not a drop of strangeness in her actions. After these words, the young man, taking the heroine by the cheek, said that if she wanted to do something, then how about a kiss? However, before the couple could do what they wanted, they heard a rustling sound and the sound of open doors. It was Andrel, who, seeing what was happening in the room, immediately blushed and, stuttering, began to say that he would not interfere, and the guys could continue. And while Liarte reacted calmly to the young man's departure, Mikhail was angry and was already thinking about a little revenge. At this point, the main character asked why Andrel had entered the room, to which the guy replied that this room was cleaned in turn by Merlin, Andrel, and Hans. Thinking about these words, the girl noticed a jar of candy on the table, after which she asked what it was. These were Aaron's favorite candies, and no matter how much Carmen tried to stop him from eating them, due to his poor health, Grandpa still ate several pieces a day. Liarte, opening a crystal vase with sweets, took out one of the candies, simultaneously remembering that the previous Duke really loved sweets. Therefore, due to Aaron's love for candy, no one would have suspected that they were poisoned with black pollen. And having thought about everything, the main character demanded to meet with the former Duke. At night, Mikhail and Liarte approached the building where Aron was currently located, and the girl said that she would go on alone, which made the younger gentleman confused and just wanted to answer something when he was interrupted. Liarte explained that she wanted to check something, so Mikhail should trust her and wait outside. The young man, reacting to this with a smile, listened to the main character because he believed her. After this, the girl knocked on the door and asked if Andrel was there, to which he immediately looked out. Seeing Liarte, the servant worriedly inquired about the reason for her arrival, and the main character explained to the young man that she needed to ask him something, since earlier Mikhail had said that he, Hans, and Marilyn took turns cleaning the room of the previous head of the family. Having said this, the girl asked Andrel to what extent Michael's words were true, to which the young man confirmed everything, and Liarte, having heard a positive answer, handed over a candy from the bedroom and asked the guy if he knew about them. Andrel was immediately surprised by what he saw and could not find the words. The main character herself did not understand why she remembered all this only now, because before her rebirth, the Bircha declared war on the Elheims and the imperial family. This means that all the answers were on the surface and the girl was looking for them somewhere deep in vain. Then Duke Carmen personally killed the previous head of the family because he thought it was the only way out for them. And upon learning that the blame for the madness of the former Duke lay with the imperial family, the Birches declared war, and that is when rumors began to spread about outstanding murderers. Namely, about Marilyn with the scary eyes and Andrel with the cat eyes, but among them there was only one person's name missing. And this is Hans's name, since the main character has never heard of him. Hans, seeing the girl, was surprised to ask the purpose of her visit at such a late hour, to which she replied that she had come to see Aaron and asked whether the disease was progressing or not. And the young man replied that there was no improvement today, and also noted that Liarte was supposed to meet Andrel at the entrance, so he should be scolded for sending her alone. Hearing this, the heroine assumed that Hans and Andrel were very close, and the guy confirmed this, saying that after Mr. Aaron saved them, they serve him together and spend a lot of time together. Lost in thought, the girl noticed that the assistants always checked the food of the previous duke for harmful substances and asked about it. And Hans replied that Andrel was responsible for the food and asked if there was any problem with that, to which Liarte disagreed, saying that the problem was not with the food, but with the candy. Seeing the sweetness, the assistant became very worried and his expression changed, and the main character explained that this candy was in the chambers of the previous head of the family. And, holding out the sweet to Hans, the girl asked if it reminded him of anything, to which he nervously looked away and said that he was seeing it for the first time. Noticing this reaction, Liarte immediately frowned and assumed that the young man would lie. Then the main character sternly said that it was Hans who brought these candies to the Duchy of Birch with the aim of poisoning the former duke with black pollen. After all, earlier, during a conversation with Andrel, Liarte learned that these sweets were brought personally by Hans. And the young man remembers that black candies were very rare, and when this misfortune happened to Aaron, Hans began to personally feed him with them. Therefore, the girl assumes that Hans was clearly worried that the duke's madness could be cured, so even after he lost his mind, he fed him candies with black pollen. And the large quantity of poisoned candies hidden in the young man's room proves this. Hearing this, the young man immediately turned around and started running away somewhere with the potion in his hands, and Liarte realized that he was going to give it to Aaron. And as soon as the main character shouted for Hans not to do this, someone pushed her slightly in the shoulder while running past. It was Mikael who came to the girl's aid and immediately broke his assistant's arms. And afterward, the younger gentleman, apologizing for not keeping his word, explained that he simply wanted to protect Liarte if something went wrong. At that moment, Duke Carmen came up and also said that when a person they valued was in danger, it was impossible to just stand and watch. Continuing, the man said that he heard the heroine's conversation with Mikael and was worried that something might go wrong, so he followed them. Liarte herself was pleased that the younger gentleman and the Duke valued her very much because she had never felt anything like this, so she immediately thanked Carmen. The Duke approached Hans and, grabbing him by the hair, joyfully noted that the traitor had finally been found. At this time, Mikael picked up a jar of potion and asked what it was. After taking a closer look, the young man assumed that it was poison, but realized that it would not work on birch, since they were resistant to most species. However, a second later, the younger gentleman expressed his guess that the scarlet color of the liquid was not poison at all, but someone's blood. And the main character explained that when working with black pollen, unusual methods can be used. So Liarte offered to sort this out after she healed the former duke. And to the younger gentleman's surprise, the girl said that she had a good way to do this. After these words, the heroine began to use magic, and pointing her hand towards Aaron, said that perhaps today she would be able to cure him completely. The former head of the Birch family himself immediately opened his eyes and began to observe what was happening. The water magic was so strong that it was able to lift Aaron into the air and completely surround him. Carmen was very surprised by what he saw and even began to stutter. But Liarte calmly asked the man not to worry, because this way she would be able to heal the former head of the family. Only a strong water awakened can get rid of the poison, but the water force must penetrate deep into the body to reach the black pollen. That is why the main character will release all her power into the body of Mr. Aaron Birch. At that moment, the man began to cough from such a strong flow of water that it made it difficult for him to breathe. Seeing this, the girl immediately became worried and asked the former duke to be patient a little, because the main character will definitely do everything possible to save Aaron. And after some time of witchcraft, the former head of the Birch family stopped twitching and coughing. And as soon as everything passed, the water released the man onto the ground and spread across the floor, while he himself stood firmly on his feet. Carmen was very surprised that his father was able to get back on his feet after so much time. At this moment, Mikael turned to his grandfather and asked about his condition, and the main character asked the same question. Aaron himself, as soon as he opened his eyes, did not understand where he was and thought he had gone crazy. Then the man began to touch his face in concern, and Carmen, looking at this, tried to calm him down. Rubbing the water from his eyes and trying to understand what was happening, Aaron saw Liarte and immediately turned to her, asking who she was. The man also said that he felt the power of water and suggested that the main character was from the Elheims. However, at the moment when the Duke wanted to introduce the main character to his father, he interrupted him and did not let him say even a word. Aaron started shouting for the girl to be sent back to Elheim immediately. Continuing, Aaron reminded Carmen how his mother died and said that he did not want to see any of the Elheims. However, Mikhail objected that no matter what Grandpa said, the main character would stay here. At which Aaron became even more angry and calmly warned that if Liarte did not leave, then he would leave, and this also caused shock in Carmen. At that moment, the girl noticed that the head of the house was right and that she was not a member of the Bircha family at all, so it was she who should leave. But Mikhail and the Duke did not agree with this, so they were not going to let the main character go. However, the girl believed that she should not destroy a family that had just reunited, so she immediately turned around and began to leave. Seeing this, the younger gentleman immediately began shouting Liarte's name, telling her to wait. But as soon as Mikhail ran after the heroine, Aaron grabbed him by the hand and asked where he was going. However, the young man took his hand back and said that the grandfather was behaving inappropriately because the girl had saved everyone and also cured him of madness. Aaron was very shocked by what he heard and could not believe that this child had cured him. After these thoughts, the man began to have memories associated with Liarte at the time of treatment. And Aaron, realizing absolutely everything that he had done, immediately began to regret his words and actions. The main character walked alone through the garden and thought about everything that had happened. It was obvious to the girl that the previous Duke hated her because there was hostile relations between the Elheims and the Bircha. And during the time of Aaron, the hatred of the duchies towards each other was even stronger, and Liarte could do nothing about it. At this moment, the main character's attention was drawn to the gray sky and the bad weather that began to appear. And when it started raining, the girl simply closed her eyes and enjoyed the cold drops falling on her face. And, according to Liarte, it shouldn't have existed at all anymore, because all this was just a rebirth. But suddenly, the main character's thoughts were interrupted by a voice that addressed her and asked her to wait. It was the younger gentleman who had caught up with the girl and was looking at her with concern. And just as Liarte wanted to say that she didn't want to cause Mikhail any more inconvenience, he grabbed her wrist. Then the young man pressed the main character to himself and hugged her tightly, asking her not to leave, which made her bury her face in his chest in surprise and remain silent. Continuing, the young man said that the girl was his savior and he promised to protect her for the rest of his life. And adding, the younger gentleman said that without Liarte, nothing else made sense to him, to which she reacted with surprise, but realized that she was pleased to hear this. Mikhail, stepping back, explained that no matter what his grandfather said, the main character could be in the Duchy of Birch. However, while the young man was speaking, he was interrupted with words that Liarte should not leave and wait a little. It was the head of the Birch family, who ran up to the main character, trying to catch his breath. At this, the girl immediately turned around and, apologizing, said that she would immediately leave the palace. But Aaron immediately objected and didn't even let the main character finish speaking. After all, the man believed that it was he who was wrong, so he apologized to Liarte. The former head of the Birch family also explained that he did not understand who exactly helped him, and that is why he treated the girl that way. And letting go of the head, Aaron said that Liarte was able to heal him with her power, but he remembered it too late, and he also heard that she healed his grandson. Therefore, the man is very grateful to the main character for everything she did. And Aaron also asked Liarte not to leave the Birch estate so that they could pay for all her good deeds. The girl remained silent at this, but after a few seconds asked if she could really stay in the estate. The man immediately nodded, and having answered positively, said that if Liarte wanted, he could stay forever. Hearing this, the main character was happy, because now she would not have to return to the Elheims, and she was accepted. However, at that moment, the girl realized that she had no strength at all, and assumed that the problem was that she was over-nervous. But suddenly, after these thoughts, Liarte felt dizzy and fell to the ground. After some time, the main character was lying in bed, and the doctor who was nearby explained to Bircha that her health was not in danger. Continuing, the man said that Liarte lost consciousness due to overuse of her abilities. The doctor also suggested that the girl had suffered severe psychological stress, so she would feel better when she rested. Suddenly, Aleph interrupted the discussion and said that he needed to tell them something. And continuing, the servant said that a letter had arrived from the palace, and he also expressed his guess that the Empire had somehow learned of Aaron's healing. Hearing this, Aaron realized that the Empire realized that the assassination attempt had been thwarted, and he considered their reaction obvious. However, Aleph added at this point, explaining that recently the rain had not stopped not only for them, but throughout the entire empire. and the man assumed that this was all because Liarte used all her strength. At that moment, the main character herself suddenly opened her eyes and attracted all attention. Seeing this, the younger gentleman reacted very emotionally, not believing that the girl had come to her senses. Liarte sat up and asked what had happened, to which the young man said that she had suddenly fainted and they had brought her to the doctor. Then the young man warned the main character that it would be better for her not to move and to rest. The Duke immediately inquired about the girl's well-being and asked her to tell him if anything hurt, but she, thanking him for his concern, replied that everything was fine. Hearing this, the younger gentleman calmed down and said that they were all worried about Liarte. After these words, the main character turned questioningly towards Aaron. The former head of the family himself was confused and did not know what to say. The Duke, seeing such a reaction, immediately intervened in the conversation and said that if Liarte was uncomfortable because of Aaron, then he would deport him, using his rights as the head of the house. Mikhail immediately agreed with his father's words, adding that his grandfather would live far away and the main character would live with them, but she was against it. Aaron, having asked the girl about her health, also said that if she was uncomfortable he would not come, so she could rest peacefully. To this, Liarte only smiled and noted that the man had not come to his senses for a long time, so she was interested in how his health was. After these words, the former Duke sighed and, touched, replied that everything was fine with him, and the main character called all this happiness and then continued talking with all the members of the Bircha family. In the evening, the Empress was walking along the corridor of the imperial palace to see her son. As she walked, the woman kicked out absolutely all the maids she came across along the way, and as soon as Terencia entered Lucas's room, a servant greeted her and warned the young man in the same way. The young man himself was very shocked by his mother's arrival and asked the reason for her appearance. However, the Empress called this question stupid because she was sure that Lucas had heard the news. Continuing, Terencia told about the rumors that Aaron Bircha was happily walking around his estate, and this made the woman angry because she did not understand why the former Duke was still alive, and her son could not do anything right. But Lucas immediately responded that he was absolutely not to blame for this. After all, the young man knew that his plan would have been perfect if not for the main character. Hearing this, the Empress assumed that since her son had a plan, this was not the end, and Lucas said that he had another way, so this time he would definitely be able to destroy the Birchi family. The woman reacted quite sternly and said that she only agreed if this really was her son's last attempt, so he shouldn't disappoint her anymore. While the Empress was leaving, Lucas was already thinking about his plan and was confident that this time everything would definitely work out and even the Pope's daughter would not be able to interfere. Then the young man smiled and, turning to the Count, asked whether Hans had carried out his previous assignment. To this, Fedez bowed and reported that although the assassination attempt had been thwarted, he had received a letter stating that the mission had definitely been completed. This answer made the young man very happy because he knew that Birch did not have long left. Sometime later, Aaron and the current Duke were sitting in the garden drinking tea and discussing something. At that moment, the younger gentleman arrived with Liarte, who noticed that everyone had already gathered. And as soon as the men saw the main character, they immediately stood up in surprise, shouting her name and asking if everything was okay with her, to which she replied that she was already much better. The girl herself noticed that the previous leader was still uncomfortable and assumed that he was still worried about the last time. Therefore, thinking about this, Liarte immediately asked Aaron how his health was and whether his body had stabilized after a long illness, and he, thanking her for her concern, said that he felt incredible lightness. The Duke responded to this with a smile and, calling the girl Lily, noted that it was all thanks to her. Hearing the new nickname, the main character was surprised and asked about its meaning, and Carmen explained that Lily, in the language of the small kingdom in which his mother lived, means everything beautiful, noble, and dear to the heart. And Mikhail also added that if the father really likes someone, he gives him an affectionate name, Lily. After listening to the explanation, Liarte found the given name very beautiful, and for the first time felt a slight tremor. At that moment, the main character realized that everything that was happening was happiness. After these thoughts, the girl noticed that there was a very beautiful cup on the table, to which the Duke explained that he thought that they would clearly need it for Liarte, so he specially ordered one. Hearing this, the main character realized that Carmen had taken care of such a small thing for her sake and was touched. And then the girl thanked Bircha for everything, for the cup and for the name, and also clarified that they do too much for her. However, Mikhail objected, saying that this was only a little, because these were all the things that Liarte should have enjoyed before. And the main character, laying her head on the younger gentleman's shoulder, thanked him. Carmen also agreed with her son's words and said that they want to give the girl something she never had, so he wonders if she wants to do something special. Hearing this, Liarte realized that she wanted to remember this beautiful moment forever. However, the main character wants to do it somehow differently and in her own way. Therefore, turning to the Duke, the girl said that she wanted to paint a picture and asked if she could do it. Carmen liked the idea and thought it could be a great hobby, so he asked Marilyn to prepare everything he needed. To this, Liarte immediately thanked the Duke, and Mikhail said that he was curious about what her first painting would be, but he was sure that it would turn out beautifully. At that moment, the heroine remembered that she had not seen or heard anything about Marilyn all day, so she inquired about her whereabouts. And the younger gentleman said that the maid had one business in the basement: she was torturing Hans. Continuing, Carmen reported that during interrogation, Hans confessed that he was a spy for the Crown Prince. But a few days ago, the assistant was walking around the estate and doing something, and now, no matter how much Marilyn and Andrel torment him, he is silent, like a partisan. After these words, Liarte realized how serious everything was and that it could not be left like that. So the main character needs to remember what happened during this period in her past life. The girl only remembered that after the funeral of the previous head of the house, something happened in the Bircha family. However, suddenly Liarte saw a candle, and as soon as she looked at it, she immediately remembered absolutely everything. Before Bircha declared war on the imperial family, the estate was engulfed in flames. The fire took away half of the servants, and the heroine then saw a photograph of the destroyed mansion in the newspaper, and now she is sure that this case was definitely connected with Hans. And while Liarte was thinking about this, Mikhail noticed her concern, so he offered to investigate this matter together if she wanted. The young man himself is going to inspect the estate and the places where Hans was, so he and the heroine can walk around and check everything at the same time. And while Carmen thought it was a great idea, Aaron was worried, saying that a walk was out of the question in such a situation, to which Mikhail only smiled and suggested that he also wanted to take a walk with Liarte. The former head reacted to this with surprise, and taking the cup, awkwardly agreed with his grandson's words. After this, Mikhail noticed that the heroine had not yet fully recovered, so he suggested that they all go for a walk together tomorrow. Liarte herself realized that since she had cured the madness of the previous chapter, she would be able to help in some way this time, as well as protect the people dear to her. At the Elheim estate, Lionel approached his father and said that he wanted to ask him something. Continuing, the young man said that when it rained incessantly throughout the empire, he felt as if his water magic was disappearing. And also, when he looked at Viamin at that moment, noticing his expression, he assumed that he shared this feeling with him. After these words, Lionel asked his father if he had felt anything similar. At first, the man remained silent, but then he realized that he had no choice and said that he felt the same way. And hearing this, the young man expressed his suspicions that it was because Liarte had left them. However, the Duke, although he agreed with this assumption, did not know what to do if the water power completely disappeared. The main character herself was already getting ready for a planned walk in the morning, thinking that she had gotten up late again. After all, Liarte sleeps like a baby at Birch's, while the Elheims haven't had that, and she assumes that it's because she feels safe now. At this point, Merlin turned to the heroine and said that she had heard about the invitation for a walk, and she agreed with what was said, but explained that this was more of a reconnaissance mission. The girl said that she had not seen the Birches walking together, but after Liarte's arrival, the atmosphere in the mansion improved. And when the heroine asked about how it was before, Merlin answered that the gentlemen always respected and loved each other, but drew the line at what was permitted, so the atmosphere in the house was awkward, and she was very happy with these changes. Then the girl said that she had prepared everything necessary for the painting, but if anything else was needed, Liarte could tell him about it. After these words, Merlin asked the main character what she would draw, and Liarte, introducing Mikhail, became a little embarrassed and replied that it was a secret, and the maid would see everything herself later. Hearing this, Merlin said that she couldn't wait to see the heroine's painting, to which she promised to finish it as soon as possible and show it. Also remembering, Liarte asked about Hans' interrogation, and the maid said that it turned out what kind of liquid he brought. The bottle contained human blood, and, judging by its unusual structure, it is assumed that it belonged to a person from the imperial family, namely the Crown Prince. Marilyn tried mixing blood with black pollen, and it caused quite a powerful explosion. After these words, the main character realized that they wanted to give the former leader this liquid to drink and then kill him with it. And the maid, agreeing with this, imagined what could have happened if it were not for Liarte, so she immediately thanked her for saving the person dear to her. At this, the main character waved her hand and said that she only did what she had to because she also cared about the people from the Bersha estate. Continuing, Liarte asked if they had managed to get any more information from Hans, to which Merlin recalled that, according to Andrel, the young man had been repeating since early morning that something would happen at midnight tonight. Hearing this, the main character was horrified as she realized that a fire could happen today at midnight. At that moment, Mikael came for Liarte and asked if she was ready, and the maid, seeing the young man, immediately said that she was declining. The younger gentleman went to the main character and said that she was still beautiful today, but seeing Liarte's dejected expression, the young man immediately asked if everything was okay with her. Approaching the girl, Mikael noticed that she looked upset and assumed that something had happened. The main character herself understood that if she told the young man about the fire, he might not believe her. After all, the only evidence was Liarte's memories from a past life, and she thought it would sound strange, but she didn't know how she could solve the problem on her own then. Mikael got down on one knee in front of the girl and said that no matter what happened, he was on her side. The younger gentleman also said that he absolutely does not want the main character to worry, so he is ready to help her at any time. And taking the girl's hand, Mikael kissed her palm, asking her to tell him everything. As Liarte struggled to find her words, she realized that this place was different from the Elheim estate. After all, there are people in the Birch estate whom the main character must protect, and they will always be on her side. So, realizing that she had nothing to fear, the girl warned that her words would sound strange, but asked Mikael to listen. And continuing, Liarte reported that today at midnight the Bircha estate would be engulfed in flames. Hearing this, the younger gentleman was horrified and assumed that it was Hans, and the heroine confirmed these words, expressing her guess that Hans walked around the estate to prepare everything for the arson. Continuing, the girl said that she was almost certain that there would be a fire today, so she wanted to personally inspect the estate during a walk. After these words, Mikael stood up and noted that if this was really the case, then they were in danger, so they needed to check everything as soon as possible. The young man then said that he would tell his father and grandfather about this, and they would inspect the estate together. The main character, seeing that the younger gentleman believed her, was very surprised. To this, Mikael smiled and said that it was natural because he had promised. Liarte herself, thinking about the pleasant feeling when she was trusted, expressed her happiness at having met the younger gentleman. After some time, Birch and the main character were already walking around all the estates. The Duke immediately asked the girl if she had any ideas on how Hans would set the fire, and Liarte told her guest that the young man would accomplish everything with the help of an ancient spell. After all, the Crown Prince had used such spells more than once to attack Birch, so there is a chance that Lucas will use the same method again. However, the main character didn't know how the Crown Prince would accomplish everything this time. Since judging by the chains that were in Mikael's eyes, there must be a mediator to activate the curse or spell, so Liarte assumed that it was hidden somewhere nearby. Approaching the lake, Aron said that Hans had been to many places in the mansion, but this was where he stayed the longest. And according to intelligence data, the young man could have hidden something near the lake from the very beginning. Hearing this, the main character said that she would check everything and immediately went into the water. But Mikael and Aron immediately panicked and asked the girl not to go deeper, as it could be dangerous. However, Liarte, already standing on the water, did not hear anything and asked again. The younger gentleman was shocked by what he saw, not understanding how the main character managed not to fail. At this point, Aron asked if this was an ability of the Elheims, to which the Duke suggested that only Liarte could do this. The girl herself waved to Bircha from the middle of the lake, telling them not to worry because she was just going to see what was in the depths. The main character thought that something was hidden right in the lake and not near it, so she decided to look deeper. But as soon as Liarte went further, she fell under the water and immediately stopped. And bending down, the main character was sure that the necessary thing must be somewhere nearby. Finally, looking around, the girl saw a stone with an ancient sign at the bottom. The Duke and Aron immediately became worried, so they turned questioningly to Liarte. The main character, looking at the stone in surprise, said that she had found what she needed. And when the girl was already on the shore, the Duke noticed that this sign was definitely left by Hans, to which she responded with consent and explained that it was the agent of the spell. Hearing this, Carmen remembered Mikhail's curse, Aaron's madness, and called the attempt to start a fire over the top. At this point, Liarte assumed that Hans had hidden similar signs throughout the mansion. And looking at the trees, the girl said that the young man said that the fire would start at midnight, so before that time, all the signs had to be found. Then the main character approached the Duke and said that she had a request. And continuing, Liarte asked Carmen to evacuate the people from the mansion as soon as possible. Mikhail asked the girl if he should order the knights to look for intermediaries, but she refused, as she believed that there could be fakes among the stones, and she herself would find the real ones faster. After these words, the main character took the young man by the hand and asked him to quickly take her to the places where Hans went. Hearing this, the younger gentleman pulled Liarte by the waist and asked if she would mind if he picked her up. After all, there are many narrow roads in the mansion where a carriage cannot pass, and the journey will take longer, but if Mikhail takes the girl in his arms, they will get there faster. And the main character, after thinking a little, hugged the young man around the neck and agreed to the proposal. The younger gentleman immediately blushed at this, but picked Liarte up in his arms. And while Mikhail stood red, the girl told the senior members of Bersha that she would find the stones as soon as possible and defuse them. Hearing this, Aaron asked the main character to be careful and take care of herself. Liarte herself replied that everything would be fine because the Bersha believed her words and she would not let them down. A few minutes later, the guys approached another building, and the girl said that another intermediary was here. And then the main character noted that she definitely had to check everything. After some time, the younger gentleman broke the 8th mediator. And trying to catch his breath, the young man noticed that Hans had indeed hidden a lot of stones. At that moment, the main character informed Mikhail that there were 3 places left. After these words, the younger gentleman took Liarte in his arms and said that they needed to hurry as it would soon get dark. The girl herself also understood that there was almost no time left, but if all the intermediaries were destroyed, the fire would be prevented. However, the main character's thoughts were interrupted by a bright light before her eyes. Seeing this, Liarte immediately turned to the young man in confusion, to which he tensed up. Fire was already visible from the windows of the building, and the main character realized that they had missed one place. Mikhail, seeing the girl's panic, said that everything would be fine, since Carmen had already evacuated people. And this fire will not harm anyone, because it will soon be extinguished, and Liarte should not worry. But a second after these words, a loud explosion was heard from the opposite side from the guys. This horrified Mikhail, as he realized that there was a place there where the death force of the Bersha family resided. And if this force is released, the situation will become much more dangerous. After all, the power of death does not affect the direct descendants of Birch, but if it reaches ordinary people, they will die. That's why no one ever even came close to that place. So Mikhail assumed that the fire was set in order to release the power and destroy the inhabitants of the Bersha estate. Now, if the power of death spreads throughout the empire, it will kill ordinary people and soldiers. And after these words, the younger gentleman asked Liarte not to go anywhere. The main character herself remembered that in her past life there was only a fire, which means that because of her the future changed. Suddenly Valto ran up to the boys, turning worriedly to Mikhail. Continuing, the young man reported that the power of death had begun to spread and Liarte needed to be saved immediately. This shocked the main character, and she asked why she was the only one who needed to be saved. And Valto explained that the Dukes would be fine, but Liarte would not be able to withstand the force. Bersha are capable of moving people over long distances and have enough power for one person, so the heroine will be able to teleport. However, the girl was also interested in what would happen to Merlin and the other servants. After all, the main character couldn't leave everyone in the estate and run away herself. At this, the young man smiled and said that others would also be saved, and Liarte had nothing to worry about. But the girl immediately replied that this was a lie, because the forest would burn faster than people could escape. Therefore, having descended to the ground, the main character said that she would never leave alone and would put out the fire. Hearing this, Valto warned Liarte that the fire was already of enormous proportions, and it would be difficult for her to extinguish the entire area. At this time, Mikhail also told the girl that it was difficult to put out a fire caused by an ancient power, so she might get hurt. However, the main character explained that she could not allow people to die, and Liarte makes a promise to the younger lord that he will protect Bersha. The reason Hans hid the stones in the water was to use it as an ancient magical offering. Therefore, it is impossible to extinguish the fire with water from the mansion, and the main character must call for a downpour herself. The young man, watching Liarte's actions, was very confused, because Mikhail promised to protect the girl and thought he saved her. However, from the first meeting of the younger gentleman with the main character, and up to this day, everything was completely different, because the one who was being saved was not Liarte, but a young man. At this time, Leon was sitting in his room and thinking about everything that was happening. Lionel, having warned the young man that he was entering, invited him to talk. After all, Leon had not left the room all this time, and Lionel also could not believe that they had missed the true heiress and were left with a fake. But among the remaining Elheims, Leon remains the strongest, so the duchy still needs him. Approaching his brother, Lionel also suggested sending the letter to Birch again, as he was sure that this time they would definitely receive an answer. However, suddenly it started raining outside, and the young man looked out the window in shock. After this, Lionel felt something strange and began to panic. And the young man realized that the same thing was happening as last time, which meant that his power was disappearing. These thoughts made the young man fall to the floor, because he understood that if the magic disappeared, everything would become worse. And Leon agreed with this, saying that then there would be no awakened ones left in Elheim. A few days later, the main character was walking through the garden, realizing that everything was different from her past life. Now all the people are safe. Now the Birch mansion is calm, and the girl is very happy that she was able to protect this place. However, Liarte did not understand why. Even after causing that downpour, she did not feel tired at all. On the contrary, the main character seemed to have much more water power. It's as if the girl has regained something she had lost long ago, and she hopes that she will be able to master all the power of the Elheims. But suddenly Liarte's thoughts were interrupted by some sounds behind her. It was the same silver fox that Mikhail had taken from the hunting competition. Seeing the fox, the main character immediately sat down next to it and began to pet it, calling it cute. Then Liart picked up the animal and tried to understand where it came from. At that moment, someone approached the main character from behind and said that the silver fox had always been here. It was a younger gentleman who greeted the girl, assuming that she was out for a walk. And Liarte, delighted by Mikhail's arrival, responded with consent and said that she had decided to get some fresh air. Then the main character asked the young man if this fox grew up in the Birch estate. However, the young man said that everything was different, and he brought the animal from the Duchy of Elheim. Continuing, Mikhail said that he met the fox during a hunting competition, but he did not want to show it to Liarte as he thought it might bring back bad memories. The younger gentleman also said that the silver fox was difficult to train, and the girl was shocked that such a cute animal needed to be trained. But the young man explained that the fox was quite fierce, but he was surprised that in Liarte's arms she was very calm, and he assumed that she liked the heroine. And seeing the girl hugging the fox, Mikhail noted that their sympathy was mutual, to which she responded with consent, calling her new pet charming. Hearing this, the younger gentleman smiled and said that he was glad that Liarte liked him. After these words, the young man asked about the heroine's well-being, because he was afraid that his father and grandfather would go crazy when they found out that she was not resting. To this, the girl replied that she was fine, and that the elder Birch were too worried about her. Mikhail stroked Liarte's cheek and asked if she knew that he was the one who was most worried about her, and the young man would like the main character to no longer expose herself to danger. However, the younger gentleman understands that the girl will make the same choice if something like this happens again. That's why Mikhail suggested to Liarte that they solve the problem together next time. The young man also asked the heroine to remember that he would always protect her, and it didn't matter how hard or dangerous it would be, because she was the most important thing to him. Hearing this, the girl said that she would remember what was said and thanked the younger gentleman. Liarte herself felt warm in her heart from the fact that Mikhail did not scold her, but said that he would always be there. Suddenly, the boys' dialogue was interrupted by a servant who was happy that he had finally found them. And continuing, Aleph reported that Duke Carmen wanted to discuss something. Already in the office, the Duke greeted the guys and asked about Liarte's condition, to which she replied that she was doing fine and thanked them for their concern. At that moment, Mikhail asked his father about the topic of conversation, and Carmen said that he wanted to discuss with the younger gentleman and Liarte the return of the debt. This surprised the main character, and she asked whether it was about repaying the debt to the imperial palace. The Duke confirmed these words, saying that he was thinking of repaying the debt to the palace. Hearing this, Liarte assumed that Carmen was planning to start a fire, and he confirmed this, explaining that there were many of their spies in the palace, so it would be easy. The man believed that since the imperial palace had decided to set fire to the Birchi estate, they should be driven into a corner and tortured a little. However, Mikhail was unhappy that the Duke was saying such cruel things in front of Liart, but Carmen noted that she was a member of their family, so she should get used to such things. The girl said that, given all the disgusting actions of the palace towards Bircha, she did not think that Carmen could leave things like this. And the main character respects the man's decision, but asks him not to harm innocent people. To this, the Duke nodded and accepted Liarte's request, saying that everything would be as she wished. After these words, the girl told about how that time, when it started pouring rain, she felt a huge surge of strength. And the main character assumes that she then took the power of the Elheim family. Hearing this, the Birches smiled and were very pleased with what was said. Mikhail and Aran called this news joyful, and they wondered how the imperial family would react to it. However, Liart was not so happy and wondered what would happen if the palace found out about this. And the man said that the imperial family would not remain idle, since if the awakened leave the country, the government is put in a difficult position, so the empire has been pleasing the Elheims for a long time, and the Elheims took advantage of this with pleasure, so that, having lost them, the imperial family might try to take revenge. The purpose of the attacks on Birch is to contain the enormous force, and if the Elheims cannot help, it is unknown what they will do to them. But the Duchy of Bircha has absolutely nothing to worry about, so they will just watch as the Empire and the Elheims slowly kill each other. At this time, in the palace of the Crown Prince, Lucas was lying on the bed and resting. The young man was pleased that Birch was now in the ashes, and he had fulfilled the deepest wish of his family, which several generations had not been able to do. Suddenly, Lucas's thoughts were interrupted by the Count, who entered the room with concern. The prince immediately realized that Fedez had come to tell him about Birch, and said that he was not feeling well due to using a lot of ancient magic, but he was sure it was worth turning the duchy into ashes. However, the Count, in great panic, reported that Bircha had quickly put out the fire. Lucas immediately called it nonsense, because he knew that such a fire could not be easily extinguished. And Fedez agreed that the flame was very powerful, because ancient magic was used for it, but he also said that it started to rain. Hearing this, the young man realized that the main character was involved in everything again. And the young man could not come to terms with the fact that Liarte had once again disrupted all his plans, because Lucas really put a lot of effort into starting the fire, and now the Crown Prince has decided that the main character will definitely be in his hands, even if he has to give her the title of princess. After these words, the young man stood up and asked the Count to find out everything about the daughter of Duke Elheim. However, before the prince could finish speaking, a loud explosion was heard in the street. Turning around, the young man saw the fire and immediately realized that this was Birch's revenge. At that moment, a servant entered the room, announcing that the king ordered them to appear before him immediately. Already in the man's office, the servant who had brought Lucas at his order bowed to him. The king immediately thanked his subordinate and turned to his son, to which he tensed up. Continuing, His Majesty said that he had received news of a fire that had started in Lucas's palace. The man also noted that this fire was not at all like a normal one, and if it was not put out, it would engulf the entire imperial palace. The young man, after listening to his father, began to panic and stutter, trying to find the words. However, the king decided to ask everything directly and assumed that this was Birch's counter-move. Adding, the man recalled that he had advised Lucas not to do anything that could offend the Duchy of Birch. The young man himself was lost in his thoughts and did not understand why everything had turned out this way, because Bircha, according to his calculations, should have been burning in flames. The prince believed that without the duchy, the threat to the empire would disappear, and found it strange that his father constantly told him not to touch this family. Hearing no answer, the king continued and said that he had sent a request for help to the Elheims, so they would be there soon. And the man asks Lucas to be polite to the Elheims, as he will not forgive his mistakes anymore. The young man understood that if the fire was put out, this situation could be resolved quietly, and then he would find a way to bring Liarte to the palace. But suddenly, a subordinate entered the room and said that the Elheim family had arrived. And as soon as the man told the servant to ask the family to put out the fire, he said that there was one problem. The emperor immediately tensed up and asked again, because since the Elheims had arrived, they needed to hurry and deal with the fire. After these words, the subordinate became a little worried and was unable to answer quickly. But a few seconds later, the young man said that the Elheims had said they were not going to take any action to put out the fire. The family itself was sitting in the carriage at this time, worried about the rapid disappearance of power. The awakened lower-class Elheims have become ordinary people again, and the direct heirs have some powers, but they are too few. And if the Duke and his sons use their power even once, they themselves will become the unawakened, whom they despise so much. So the man didn't know what to do when the king gave the order to put out the fire. As soon as the coachman announced their arrival at their destination, Lionel told his father that they had to get out. However, the Duke immediately responded in the negative and explained that they would not leave the carriage under any circumstances. After all, the Elheims paid a visit to the palace on the orders of the Crown Prince, but with the statement that they would not interfere in the affairs between the royal family and Berkshire. Hearing this, Lionel asked his father what he wanted to do next, and the man repeated that they would not get out of the carriage and would under no circumstances use force. In response to Viamin's words about the order, the Duke asked him if he wanted to put out this fire in order to finally lose his strength. The man then explained that it would be better for the Elheims not to interfere, as it was a matter between the royal family and Birka. After these words, the Duke asked his sons if they knew where Tandarian was now, and Lionel said that no one had seen him in the palace since the fire began. At this, the man became very angry and called Tandarian useless, not understanding what he was doing in such a situation. Suddenly there was a knock on the carriage door and all the Elheims immediately tensed up. The Duke dropped his gaze and began to speak about what he had previously said to his sons. However, at that moment, the man was interrupted by the words that this was the nightly order of His Majesty. And as soon as the carriage door opened, the king noticed that he and the Duke had not seen each other for a long time. Continuing, the man noted that he had heard about the Elheims' reluctance to put out the fire, and he understood that they did not want to interfere in the affairs between Berkshire and the royal family. But His Majesty has concerns that the Elheims not only do not want to put out the fire, but are unable to do so. Therefore, after these words, the Emperor ordered an immediate demonstration of water power. Hearing this, the Duke realized that the king was not stupid, and immediately began to doubt his refusal. His Majesty, not seeing his order carried out, became angry and sternly repeated his words. Finally, the Elheims got out of the carriage and stood before the Emperor. The Duke then asked how their family should demonstrate the power of water, and the king pointed to a small greenhouse, not connected to the palace of the Crown Prince, and asked that the fire in it be put out. The man accepted the instructions and immediately turned to one of his sons. Viamin, suspecting where this was going, panicked and began to stutter, but still answered his father. And the Duke, continuing, told the young man to use force and put out the fire. After these words, the young man approached the right place and began to try to show his strength. And as soon as the water began to extinguish the fire a little, the young man's hands weakened and began to tremble. Therefore, after just a second, Viamin winced from pain and exhaustion, and his strength ceased to manifest. Lian, looking at his brother, was convinced that he was now unawakened. At this point, the Duke turned to the king and asked if this was enough proof, and His Majesty, looking away, replied that he had seen quite enough. However, the Emperor also noted that the others had not demonstrated their abilities. So after, the man informed the Duke that it was his turn to show his strength. Continuing, the king explained that Elheim might not put out the fire, but if he showed his magic, then suspicion would be removed from him. This made the man worried, because he assumed that the Emperor had wanted to make sure from the very beginning that the Elheims had not lost their power. The Elheims themselves reigned over the entire kingdom, not because of their wealth, good political skills, or skillful conduct of wars, but only because of the power of water. So the Duke was afraid to imagine what the king's wrath would be if the Elheims lost their magic. And hearing the Emperor's order to begin, the man began to make every effort to show his abilities. However, suddenly a very loud sound appeared, which attracted the attention of all the servants. And a mysterious sign appeared in the sky, and the Duke, looking up, did not understand what was happening. A few minutes ago, everyone was running around the palace in panic because they knew that ordinary water would not help, and the fire was actively spreading. Tandarian was going down to the basement at that moment, trying to find the one he needed. The young man knew that the creature similar to the Spirit King that the Crown Prince was hiding must be somewhere nearby. And after some time, the young man reached the right place. Looking at the girl, Tandarian noticed that something was wrong because her eyes were open. Then the young man smiled and assumed that the queen had woken up and asked what she was. And the girl, grinning, replied that she was the past. Hearing this, Tandarian became thoughtful and asked the queen if she could turn back time. The girl answered positively, but warned that she would need a lot of strength for this. The young man was pleased with this answer and noted that surveillance of the crown prince had yielded excellent results. The queen at this point reported that she could smell water and asked the young man if he was a water-awakened one. And while Tandarian responded with agreement, the girl also said that he smelled like a fake. This made the young man tense up, but he realized that they were talking about Leon, so he asked the queen why she needed him. But the girl never gave a reason, so Tandarian warned that if she remained silent, he would not tell her anything either. Hearing this, the queen spoke of her desire to find her other half in order to become complete, and then the girl will be able to turn back time as much as Tandarian wishes. After these words, the young man realized that if the queen really did this, then they would return to the time when Liarte was still with the Elheims, so he immediately agreed. Continuing, Tandarian said that he would bring the girl a fake when he had the chance, but in exchange he wanted to see proof that she was a spirit connected to the past. And the young man will believe the queen if she turns back time to the moment when the fire broke out in the palace. But the girl warned that then she would fall asleep again for several months. However, Tandarian considered such a fee too insignificant to detect the fake. And the queen, after thinking a little, agreed to this condition and began to return to the moment before the fire. Having finished, the girl looked at the young man and said that she would wait for the fake. And then, the queen fell asleep again for the period she had spoken of earlier. At this time on the street, the mysterious sign in the sky disappeared, and everyone was surprised even more. Lionel continued to look up, trying to understand what had just happened. One of the knights turned to the king and said that the entire fire in the palace had disappeared. Hearing this, His Majesty looked sternly at the Duke and noted that the fire was extinguished. The Emperor was pleased with this news, but he was not happy that he had not seen the power of the Elheims and hoped that he would succeed next time. And the king warned that then the Duke would not escape being tested again. After these words, the man tensed up, as he realized that His Majesty knew what situation Elheim was in. After some time, the Elheims returned home, and Lionel, getting out of the carriage, noted that they were on the verge of collapse. And the young man assumed that the king wanted to make sure that they had no strength, so next time they would not be able to do anything. The Duke was thinking about Liarte and said that she needed to be returned immediately. And Lionel reported that they had sent Bircha many letters, but had never received a response. At this, the Duke became furious, and calling his son stupid, explained that if there was no answer, then he had to take what he wanted by force. Lionel was taken aback by this, because he couldn't imagine his father like that. The Elheim family used to be quite friendly, but now there is only a feeling of enmity between them. At this moment, the young man's thoughts were interrupted by Tandarian, surprised by their early return. However, Lionel was only interested in his brother's whereabouts throughout this time, and he said that he had one thing to do. But the young man, seeing the smile on Tandarian's face, did not understand how he could smile in such a situation. And when the young man asked why he couldn't smile, Lionel replied that they didn't have time because they needed to bring Liarte. However, Tandarian interrupted his brother, saying that he would return the main character. And Lionel immediately asked how the young man planned to do this. After these words, Tandarian turned to Leon and said that he would proceed with the plan only if he did not object. After all, the young man found something important and believes that it will help. Hearing this, Leon smiled and replied that he would do anything to get Liarte back. The main character herself was already actively drawing her first picture. At this point, Merlin noticed that the silver fox had become attached to Liarte, to which she agreed and said that she was very sweet and obedient. However, the maid, remembering everything that the fox had done before, was not sure that she was truly obedient. Then the girl turned her gaze to the painting and called it very beautiful. Hearing this, the main character asked Merlin if she had guessed what it was. And the maid immediately responded with consent, saying that Liarte had painted a beautiful sea. After these words, the heroine smiled and said that this was the sea that she saw for the first time. After all, while in Elheim, Liarte always wanted to go to a spacious and open place, so when Mikael took her from there, he brought her to the sea and it was imprinted in her memory for a long time. After listening to everything, Marilyn remarked that it was a very beautiful work for a first painting and asked if it should be framed. However, the main character thought about it and said that she wanted to give this painting to one person. At this time, the younger gentleman stood in the courtyard and talked with one of the knights. But suddenly the dialogue between the young men was interrupted by someone's voice, which was addressing Mikael. It was the slightly agitated protagonist holding her painting in her hands. The knight immediately greeted Liarte, and the girl herself told Mikhail that she wanted to say something. Hearing this, the young man immediately asked to clarify what exactly was being discussed, and the girl, although she was worried, showed her work, saying that she wanted to give it to Mikhail. Continuing, Liarte said that this was her first painting, and she painted the sea where she and the young man had traveled. After this, the younger gentleman froze in shock and could not believe that he could accept this gift. But as soon as the heroine confirmed that Mikhail could take the painting, he immediately thanked her and enthusiastically noted that this was the best gift he had ever been given and that he would cherish it. At this moment, the knight also noticed the painting and was surprised by its beauty, so he said that Liarte had talent, and Mikhail agreed with this, but was upset that the heroine's work could not be shown to the world, so he suggested that she take part in the competition. Because there is a painting competition where nobles participate anonymously and everyone can freely demonstrate their skills. And the younger gentleman is confident that Liarte's work will be declared the best work of art. Hearing this, the main character remembered that she had heard about an anonymous painting competition before the rebirth. There are 3 dukes in the empire and Archduke Ilus, a close confidant of Empress Terentia, Duke Elheim, the Water Awakened, and Duke Bersha, the Death Awakened. There is also Duke Charon, who hides his face behind a mask. And the main character heard that Charon is the main connoisseur of this competition under the pseudonym Jen Walker. Therefore, Liarte assumed that by participating in the competition, she would be able to meet the Duke and thus help the Birche family. So, having thought everything over, the girl agreed to take part in the exhibition, to which Mikhail was delighted and was going to tell his father about it. And after these words, the younger gentleman once again thanked Liarte for the gift, since he did not think that he would be the first to receive something from her. However, the main character did not understand and asked again, but the young man avoided answering and asked what she wanted as a gift in return. Hearing this, the girl was confused because she had not thought about it, to which the younger gentleman said that he would then choose something to his taste. And when Liarte asked what exactly the young man wanted to give her, he replied that it was a secret and she should wait impatiently. And the main character, although she didn't understand what Mikhail was talking about, trusted him and would wait. Suddenly, at that moment, the sky turned black and the boys froze in shock, looking up. Seeing the hero's surprise, the knight became worried and asked if something had happened. And Liarte, stuttering, suggested that the sky had just turned black and asked Mikhail about it. To which the younger gentleman replied that he also felt something similar and expressed his assumption that it was some kind of strong aura. The main character began to worry a lot and said that she had a bad feeling, and Mikhail immediately hugged Liarte, saying that nothing had happened, so she shouldn't worry. The younger master himself realized that if he thought about it, today Birch's spies were setting fire to the imperial palace, so he believed that it must be somehow related. Despite Liarte's bad feeling, peace and quiet reigned for several days. The girl practiced painting after she decided to participate in the competition. And also the main character gradually began to get used to spending time with the Bircha family, but the girl found it strange that everyone asked her if she needed anything. However, during these days, Liarte smiled a lot, and in Elheim, she never dreamed of such a thing. But now the girl is no longer filled with rage from memories of the Elheims. And the main character doesn't even care what happens to her past family. At this point, Liarte's thoughts were interrupted by Merlin, apologizing for disturbing her. And continuing, the maid invited the girl to take a walk with her in the garden. Already in the garden, the main character noticed that the weather was wonderful today. And Marilyn agreed, saying that on a special day, even heaven is kind to someone. Hearing this, the girl was surprised and tried to understand what special day they were talking about. The maid, having reached the right place, pointed with her hand and informed Liarte that they had arrived. The entire Bircha family and servants stood in front of the girls, calling the main character to them. And at that moment, the younger gentleman turned to Liarte with a smile and congratulated her on her birthday. The main character herself froze in shock, as she had completely forgotten that it was her birthday today. Liarte's birthday is the anniversary of his mother's death. However, for Leon, this day was always a holiday that he celebrated. Every year the girl sat alone in a dark room looking out the window. And the main character wasn't sad because she considered it a normal thing. However, now everything had changed for Liarte, and looking at the prepared surprise, she asked Bircha why they had decorated it with roses. And Carmen explained that the girl's name had the meaning of a blue rose, so they wanted to show these flowers to her and bought up everything that was in the empire. The main character herself, having said that she liked the surprise, noticed that everyone was looking at her with a very warm gaze. Liarte also saw that Birchie and the servant sincerely congratulated her on her birthday, which was a first for her. At that moment, Mikhail approached the girl and said that meeting her was the greatest luck in his life. And then, kissing the main character's hand, the younger gentleman thanked her for being born. Hearing this, Liarte was touched, because for the first time her birth was not called a crime, and she could not believe that she could be so happy. After Mikhail's words, others began to approach the girl with congratulations and gratitude for the fact that she became a member of the Bersha family. The main character was taken aback by this and asked again whether she could really be a member of the Birch family. Hearing this, Carmen and his father smiled and noted that Liarte was already their family, since without her the Birches would no longer exist. The younger gentleman said that he was very glad to spend this day with the heroine. And then the young man suggested to Liarte that she spend every birthday in this place. The girl could not contain her emotions because of everything that was happening and burst into tears. Seeing this, everyone panicked, so they began to ask the main character about the reason for her tears. Liarte, trying to calm down, smiled and explained that she was simply very happy. The girl herself was really so happy that now she will never forget this day, and even if something very bad happens, she will be able to live on only thanks to these memories. And after Mikhail's warning that congratulations do not end with words alone, the majestic ceremony of gift-giving began. The previous duke gave the main character a ring with the Birche crest, and now she can buy anything just by using their name. The Duke of Carmen presented Liarte with a deed of purchase of the land and the right of ownership of it. Marilyn, feeling a little awkward, gave the girl a necklace she had made for her with her own hands. Valto and Andril also presented small gifts to the main character. And Mikhail decided to make a special gift, and having escorted the girl to her room, asked if she was tired from the unexpected party. But Liarte answered negatively and thanked the young man for seeing her off. However, as soon as the main character wanted to leave, the younger gentleman interrupted her, saying that the most important thing remained. Hearing this, the girl looked at Mikhail with confusion and began to wait for an explanation. The younger gentleman himself at that moment opened the door of the room, saying that he had prepared 17 gifts for Liarte. The main character was surprised by the number, but Mikhail noticed that one more gift was missing and suggested opening one. The girl listened carefully, so she opened one of the boxes which contained a plush toy. And the younger gentleman explained that this teddy bear was a gift for Liarte's 4th birthday, and everything else was a gift for all her birthdays. After all, even though it's already late, Mikhail would like to congratulate the main character on all the birthdays that she didn't celebrate. After these words, the girl hugged the young man tightly and thanked him. The main character herself felt that the younger gentleman had saved even her past self, and Liarte believed that Mikhail was the most important gift in her life. At that moment, the young man said that Carmen had suggested holding the heroine's coming-of-age ceremony in the Duchy of Birch when the painting competition was over. After all, then everyone will immediately know that Liarte is a member of the Birch family. And when the girl reminded her that she had long since passed her majority, Mikhail replied that it didn't matter because no one could forbid them from holding the ceremony. Hearing this, the main character smiled and agreed to the proposal. The young man, assuming that many people would come, even Elheim, asked if Liarte would be okay, and the girl said that she was indifferent to the Elheims, and now they meant nothing to her. Sometime later, in the Duchy of Elheim, Lionel went to his father and reported that a letter had arrived from Bersha. The Duke immediately assumed that this was Liarte's answer, but the young man answered in the negative and said that in a few months, the heroine's coming-of-age ceremony would be held in Birch. After these words, the man wilted, because it was still unknown whether the Queen of Spirits with whom Tandarian spoke had woken up. And even if the Elheims go to Bircha, they have no reason to take Liarte, so there is a chance that they will be disgraced again in front of the other nobles. The Duke's thoughts were interrupted by Lionel asking whether they should go to the ceremony. However, at this point, Leon intervened in the conversation, saying that they should definitely come because Liarte is their family, and he believes that they are obliged to participate in the ceremony. After some time, the main character continued to paint pictures, and in the process, the girl thought about whether she should send her work to the final selection of the painting competition, because then she would definitely meet Duke Sharon. But suddenly Liarte's thoughts were interrupted by the younger gentleman who hugged her from behind. Continuing, the young man suggested that the main character take a break, since she had been sitting at the painting for a very long time. However, the girl asked the younger gentleman not to worry since she also thought so, but the dukes praised her so much that it was not difficult for her at all. But Liarte wanted to ask Mikhail something, so she asked if he would listen to her. The main character then said that she would like to use special materials for her painting, and she wondered if there might be something similar in birch. And the younger gentleman reported that there was paint for icons, donated by the Temple of Light, which is sponsored by Birche. However, for an ordinary person this would be difficult, but the young man believed that Liarte, as a strong awakened one, would most likely succeed. The heroine from her past life remembers that Duke Karen was looking for a person who could restore the damaged icon, and therefore, if she proves that she can do it, he will definitely contact her. And after thinking everything over, the girl asked Mikhail if she could take this paint. Hearing this, the younger gentleman smiled and said that he would bring the beauty since the main character needed it. And then the young man once again suggested that Liarte take a little break from painting lessons and begin dancing lessons. The girl, looking at Mikhail at that moment, realized that sometimes he reminded her of a silver fox. And smiling, the main character agreed to the younger gentleman's proposal. During the dance, the young man noticed that Liarte's skills had noticeably improved, and she replied that it was all thanks to his lessons. The girl herself has been very busy lately, due to preparations for the competition and the coming-of-age ceremony. During breaks, the younger gentleman teaches the main character how to dance, and thanks to this, her skills have grown. However, when Liarte sees Mikhail constantly asking her to dance with him, she gets the idea that he just wants to spend some time with her. At the moment of the heroine's thoughts, the young man said that he had a request for her and asked her to listen. But suddenly the girl made a mistake in the dance and began to fall, creating an awkward situation. And while Liarte was apologizing, saying that she had accidentally stumbled, the younger gentleman blushed, but replied that everything was fine. After these words, the girl asked Mikhail what he wanted to ask about. And the younger gentleman asked the main character if she would dance the first dance with him on the day of the coming-of-age ceremony. At this, Liarte thought about it and, smiling, agreed to the first dance. However, the young man immediately became serious and assumed that the heroine did not know the meaning of the first dance. The girl was confused by this because she did not know that this dance had a meaning. And hearing this, the younger gentleman explained that the first dance is danced by a man and a woman who have feelings for each other. And after that, a little worried, Mikhail asked the main character what she thought of him. Liarte herself could not answer right away and thought about the young man's question. After all, the girl is glad when the younger gentleman is nearby, and she is also happy and excited when he touches her. However, the main character is not completely sure that this is love. And after thinking it over, Liarte apologized and explained that she didn't know what it felt like to fall in love and didn't know what love was, so it was hard for her to define her feelings. Mikhail realized that the girl had really been dealing with the pain alone for a long time and was unable to properly take care of herself. And the young man believes that the main character will begin to understand her feelings gradually. So, hugging Liarte tightly, the younger gentleman said that there was no need to hurry, and when she was sure they would talk again, and until then, he would be there. The girl herself pressed herself against Mikhail and shyly thanked him. Sometime later, in the Imperial Palace, Lucas sat, thinking about everything that was happening. Suddenly there was a knock on the young man's door, and he immediately gave permission to enter. After these words, the door opened, and Hestel Leven entered the room, bowed, and greeted him. The Crown Prince greeted her in return and asked the girl if she had learned the rules of conduct in high society well. And Hestel answered positively, to which Lucas smiled and noted that it was necessary to prepare carefully. Continuing, the young man said that with the girl's ability to influence the thinking of others, he would force Liarte to go with him. After these words, Hestel smiled and promised the Crown Prince that she would not disappoint him. However, Lucas did not even doubt the girl and replied that he believed her. Hestel Leven is the daughter of a viscount, renowned among the aristocrats for her talent for painting, but the Crown Prince did not choose her for this reason. The girl has a special ability to change the thinking of others, and the young man believes that this power will play an important role in catching the main character. Thinking about this, the Crown Prince told Hestel that she looked very much like Elheim's daughter. Hearing this, the girl was taken aback, and Lucas explained that although their appearance was not identical, there were similarities. However, at this point the dialogue was interrupted by a servant who announced a guest, but Lucas replied that he had no appointments. And the servant continued, saying that Duke Charon had arrived. The young man was shocked by this, because he realized that this was the same stranger who always hid behind a mask. The servant also reported that the Duke had brought the seal of the Karen family and the ring of the imperial family. After these words, the Crown Prince, with interest, ordered the servant to invite the Duke. And Hestel, hearing this, immediately bowed and announced her departure. Already in the corridor, the girl exchanged glances with the Duke and, surprised by his appearance, headed in the direction she needed. In Lucas's room, the young man remarked that he was glad to meet him, but he was only interested in the purpose of the visit. And the Duke said that he wanted to ask the Crown Prince about the fire in the imperial palace. Continuing, the young man said that he had heard that an unusual fire had begun to spread in Lucas's palace, which could not be extinguished with water, and then he was informed that it had suddenly gone out. And the young man was sure that the fire was caused in an unusual way, and he assumed that this incident was related to the temple. After listening to everything, Lucas realized that the Duke was well prepared and asked him what he wanted, to which the young man asked permission to meet with the fire tamer. Hearing this, the Crown Prince smiled slyly as he realized that he could use Duke Charon as an excuse in this way. So without further ado, Lucas replied that it would not be difficult to arrange, but he did not know what Karen had in mind and could not act thoughtlessly. So the Crown Prince told the Duke to help him, and then he would introduce him to the tamer. And Karen, although he agreed, warned that if this was a lie, then punishment would not be long in coming. Therefore, if the Crown Prince deceives the young man, he should not expect mercy. Lucas asked Karen not to worry, and he himself planned to find out how he found out about the cause of the fire, because even the Emperor does not know this. Then the young men shook hands and agreed to cooperate. The moment of the final selection had arrived, and Liarte and Mikhail escorted the maid, asking her to take care of herself, to which she said that she would do everything and return safely. Continuing, Merlin said that she would bring the painting to the final selection, and although she does not know what the heroine painted, she feels that it is excellent. And after these words, the girl got into the carriage and left, and Mikhail noted that it was time for him and Liarte to go too, since his father asked them to come to his office. On the way to the Duke, the young man expressed his joy that the main character managed to paint a picture with a special paint, and also said that he saw it used for the first time in real life. Hearing this, Liarte thanked Mikhail and noted that it was because he brought her the paint, but he reminded her that an ordinary person would not have been able to cope with her, and it was only thanks to her efforts. After these words, the girl realized that even the younger gentleman was talking about this, and she believed that if Merlin, being a simple person, felt something unusual, then Duke Charon would also be able to understand everything. At that moment, Mikhail asked Liarte if she could devote a little more time to him, since the painting had been sent. The main character herself immediately remembered all the moments while painting the picture, because it seemed to her that this was enough. At this point, the young man continued to remark that the painting was a bit abstract and asked Liarte to tell him what she had painted on it. However, the girl, thinking about her new painting, was a little confused and could not answer quickly. Seeing this, the younger gentleman looked at the main character with a smile and asked again, but Liarte, after remaining silent, replied that what was depicted in the painting was still a secret. And the young man, although taken aback by this, agreed and asked the heroine to be sure to tell him later. As soon as the boys entered Carmen, he informed the previous Duke of their arrival. Hearing this, Aaron told the Duke to speak about everything faster if everyone was gathered. The guys were surprised by this, and they tried to understand what they wanted to tell them. And at that moment, Carmen announced that he and Aaron were planning to transform Berka into a principality. After this news, Liarte immediately asked the men what prompted them to make such a sudden decision. And the Duke said that this was a question he had been pondering for quite some time. Bircha has existed since time immemorial, and Carmen was raised from childhood to believe that the line between the royal family and Elheim was sacrosanct and revenge was forbidden no matter what happened. But Aaron, remembering everything that had been done to Bircha, decided that their family could no longer remain on the sidelines. And the younger gentleman agreed with this, because if Birch's goal was to simply live peacefully, then they did not have to be attached to the others. And at that moment, Aaron also said that he thought that it was worth speeding up Liarte's coming-of-age ceremony a little. After all, unpleasant news reached Carmen that Duke Charon had united with the imperial family. Continuing, the man explained that Charon and the imperial family had not done anything suspicious yet, but it worried him. Therefore, Carmen believes that since everything is fine for now, it is necessary to successfully hold the coming-of-age ceremony and prepare for the transformation of the duchy. This made the main character a little nervous, because nothing like this had happened in her past life. According to Liarte's recollections, Karen was not interested in anyone except those who could restore the icon. So the girl is sure that the Duke made a deal with the Crown Prince precisely for the sake of the icon. However, the main character believes that if Karen sees her painting, he will definitely want to contact her. In the Duchy of Sharon, the Duke himself was preparing for the competition and looking at himself in the mirror. Looking at himself, the young man noticed that his hair had become paler than the first time. And from what he saw, the young man assumed that he was using his power too often. Suddenly, Karen was interrupted by a servant, who announced that his carriage was ready to depart. Hearing this, the young man headed towards the exit and reached for his mask to put on. However, a second later, the young man came to his senses that he didn't need a mask, because now he was Jen Walker. Already at the competition venue, the young man was met by a man who immediately told him that these paintings had passed the selection stage. Continuing, the critic asked the young man which painting he liked the most. And Karen, looking at everything, assumed that again there was nothing special about the competition. However, the Duke's attention was unexpectedly drawn to the painting of the main character. The men immediately realized that the young man also liked this picture and noted that the victory in this competition would be unanimous. The young man himself felt the power and was glad that he had finally found a person who could restore the icon. Thinking about this, Karen immediately ordered the men to tell who painted this picture. But no one knew anything about the author, because the painting was exhibited anonymously. Hearing this, the young man frowned, but he understood that he needed to find out the author by any means necessary. At this moment, Hestel was watching everything that was happening and smiling slyly, waiting for the right time. After some time, the Duke was already going down to the exit and decided that he would try to ask the higher authorities about the painting. However, Hestel suddenly stood in the young man's way and greeted him. Continuing, the girl clarified whether Karen was the same talented artist Jen Walker. The young man himself immediately remembered that he had seen Hestel in the palace of the Crown Prince and remained silent. And the girl, not hearing an answer, decided to introduce herself, to which the Duke noted that he knew her because he had heard that she was quite a popular artist among the aristocrats. After these words, the young man suggested that Hestel had come because of the painting competition, and she confirmed this. After all, the girl also took part, but the picture was excluded from the preliminary selection, and she waited for it to be returned, but this did not happen, so she came in person. Hearing this, the Duke asked Hestel the purpose of her visit, because if the painting was not returned, it would have to be selected. The girl smiled at this and said that she was just thinking about the fact that she didn't pass. Continuing, Hestel said that this time she presented a painting in which the entire canvas was painted in red light. After these words, Karen assumed that the girl had painted that picture, but he doubted it, because he did not feel any sacred power from her. And thinking about it, the young man realized that either there was something he didn't know or Hestel was lying. At this point, the girl was about to leave and noted that if she said more, the Duke would understand everything, so she asked him to pretend that he had not heard anything. However, Karen himself politely told Hestel to wait a little and stopped her in the same way. And continuing, the young man asked the girl to tell him more about that painting. After this conversation, Hestel immediately went to the Crown Prince and reported that Duke Charon was the famous Jen Walker. Lucas couldn't even imagine that Karen would change his appearance and ask the girl how she approached him. And Hestel said that she told the Duke that she was the owner of the painting that he needed, so now he was her man. Hearing this, the Crown Prince praised the girl, but asked her not to make mistakes when she bewitched Liarte. Hestel bowed and told the young man not to worry, because she would do everything to fulfill Lucas's will. Sometime later, the main character was sitting on her bed, surprised by the news that her painting had won an award. But Merlin noted that this victory was not surprising, as she was sure that Laratha's painting would win the award. The heroine herself understood that since she received the award, it meant that everyone had definitely paid attention to the picture. And if people found out that there is a person who can paint an icon, then Duke Charon will now look for Liarte by any means necessary. At this point, the main character's thoughts were interrupted by Merlin, who asked her what she would do with the money she had won. However, Liarte was surprised by the presence of such a prize and asked again, to which the maid explained that it was sent today along with the letter. Continuing, Merlin suggested that they go now and buy something if the main character wanted. But not hearing an answer, the maid assumed that the heroine did not need anything because the masters had already given her everything. However, suddenly, Liarte had an idea, and she invited Merlin to go shopping with her in the city center. The girl agreed to this without hesitation and said that she would go call the knights. But the main character stopped the maid, explaining that she wanted to go only together. So Liarte suggested to Merlin that they make it all their shared secret. Already in the city, the main character realized that this was her first trip outside the house. And looking around, Liarte was surprised at how people looked outside the mansion. After all the residents were peaceful, happy, and, in the girl's opinion, this is the joy of ordinary people. That's why the main character wants to keep this moment in her memory. After some time, the girls went into a scarf shop, and Liarte was surprised by the number of them. And since the heroine liked many of the products, she asked the saleswoman to pack several for her. Then Liarte turned her gaze to the brooches and, stopping at one of them, said that it would do. Having paid for everything, the girls left the store, and Merlin noticed that the main character had bought a lot. To which Liarte explained that these were all gifts for the people of Birch, as she wanted to thank many people. And after these words, the main character handed Marilyn a box, saying that it was a gift for her. To the surprise of the maid, Liarte explained that she wanted to spend the first money she earned wisely, and then thanked Merlin for everything. The girl, blushing, noted that this was the first time she had received such a gift, and with tears in her eyes, thanked the heroine. Liarte herself said that she thought that this gift would suit Merlin, but she did not know whether she would like it, but she immediately replied that she would be glad to receive any gift from the main character. At that moment, Liarte suddenly felt a weak water energy and turned around sharply. And a second later, the main character realized that Leon was watching her. However, realizing that the young man was showing himself so openly in order to lure her, Liarte frowned. Therefore, when Marilyn asked questions, the heroine said that everything was fine and suggested returning home. As she left, Liarte mentally warned her brother that his surveillance was useless because she would never meet him. The young man himself, realizing that the main character had ignored him, was taken aback. After all, Leon thought that he would be able to meet his sister when he came to Bersha. But still, the young man believed that he would still have a chance and that he and Liarte would definitely meet when she came of age. After some time, seeing a beautiful table, the girl assumed that today was some special day. And Carmen, holding a cup, said that today was truly a special day, and there was a reason for congratulations. Then the rest of the Bircha family joined the Duke and congratulated the main character on receiving the award. Liarte, a little embarrassed, thanked him for the congratulations and said that she wanted to tell him about the award in person when she returned. After these words, Birch began to ask where the girl had gone today, to which she said that she wanted to buy something and asked Merlin to bring what they had prepared. The maid immediately brought 3 small boxes, which were gifts for Bircha. When looking at it, the men were extremely surprised that they had been given something and could not believe what was happening. At this point, Liarte revealed that she had bought the gifts with the money she had received from the painting competition because it was the first money she had ever earned, and she did not want to waste it. After these words, the men were so moved that they could not hold back their tears. As soon as Carmen opened the box, he saw a red brooch with the Bircha symbol and noted that it was the best gift he had received in recent years. Aaron, looking at the brooch, said that he would wear it with pleasure and thanked the main character. Liarte herself turned her attention to Mikhail and asked him if he would open the gift too, and the younger gentleman, opening the box, was very surprised because the brooch was not like everyone else's. Seeing Mikhail's reaction, the main character asked him if he liked the gift because she wanted to give him something special, and the young man looked at Liarte with a smile and said that he really liked this gift. Continuing, the younger gentleman added that by wearing this brooch, he would always feel that the girl was next to him. But the young man also clarified that it would be difficult for him to put on the brooch himself, to which the heroine offered her help, and he thanked her very emotionally. Watching all this happen, the men were outraged and irritated by how cunning Mikhail was. Thinking about this, Carmen told the main character that they also had a gift for her, because you can't congratulate someone on receiving an award in a painting competition empty-handed. Putting the pendant with the crystal on the table, the Duke said that this item can only be used by the awakened, and if the girl is in danger, she can use the ability of this necklace, and the Bircha will find her at any time of the day or night. Continuing, the man explained that for this, Liarte only needed to pour his power into the necklace, and the girl, pressing the pendant closer to herself, began to concentrate all the energy of the water into it. As soon as the main character finished, she asked the others if they heard anything, to which Carmen laughed and said that only Bircha could hear this sound. And the younger lord also clarified that they could hear Liarte's call even outside the duchy. The girl was surprised that there were sounds that only Bercha could hear, and they said that there was no need to use the necklace now, but it was better for her to carry it with her. The main character responded to this with a smile and thanked him for the gift. At this point, Carmen asked if Liarte had prepared well for the coming-of-age ceremony, because everything had to go perfectly. Since the walls had been decorated by an artist from the royal family, the columns had been remade in a temple style and had become even more luxurious. But suddenly the Duke came to his senses and explained that although the ceremony was for the girl, he was much more excited than she was. Continuing, the man said that he always wanted to arrange some kind of holiday for his daughter. Hearing this, Liarte thought, because she had never felt her father's love and did not know what it was. Then the main character thanked Carmen, saying that everything was fine. Aaron asked the girl if she knew how the coming-of-age ceremony was held, to which she replied that she had heard that it was different in every family, but she didn't know the details. Hearing this, the man said that during the Berche coming-of-age ceremony, a sign is drawn with the blood of the head of the house. And then, before the eyes of the main character, a vision will appear connected with Berche's abilities. And Carmen asked Liarte to remember the vision well, and she suggested that it could help her. However, the Duke noted that it was difficult to answer this because everything depended on the girl. Sometime later, standing in front of the door to the room, Mikhail expressed his joy that the ceremony would finally take place tomorrow. Liarte smiled at this and said that she couldn't believe that her coming-of-age ceremony would take place in Birch. And continuing, the girl thanked the younger gentleman for always thinking of her and caring for her as a member of the Birche family. The main character also paid special attention to gratitude for the dance lessons and noted, after all, thanks to diligent practice, Liarte will not make mistakes even when dancing with other people. Hearing this, Mikhail tensed up and asked the girl who exactly she was planning to dance with. The main character was a little confused by this and hesitantly told that she had someone in mind. After these words, Mikhail decided to assume different options, starting from his grandfather and father, ending with all the servants. However, Liarte asked the younger gentleman to calm down because he did not know this man, and the young man immediately began to think, because he did not know that among the heroine's circle there was a man who was unknown to him. Seeing Mikhail's reaction, the girl excitedly asked what happened, to which he only smiled and replied that everything was fine. Then, taking Liarte by the hand, the young man replied that he had simply had some stupid thoughts in his head. Continuing, the young man tenderly kissed the main character's hand. And the younger gentleman decided not to finish there, so he also licked the girl's fingers and carefully bit one of them. Liarte became embarrassed by such actions and blushed deeply, trying to understand what was wrong with Mikhail. At that moment, the young man let go of the main character's hand and saying that they would see each other tomorrow, left. The girl herself stood in a stupor, thinking that the younger gentleman was behaving like a capricious child today. That night, Liarte was sleeping peacefully in her bed and suddenly a familiar voice began asking her to wake up. It was Mikhail, who was hanging over the main character, looking intently into her eyes. Then the young man kissed Liarte's hand and told her not to be afraid because he would not eat her. However, after these words, the girl woke up from Marilyn's warning that she was entering. Continuing, the maid said that there was a lot to do today, so the main character had better get up early. And as soon as Liarte stood up, Merlin said that she would help her get ready. The girl herself still could not come to her senses after the dream, and assuming that Mikhail had appeared to her in a dream because of yesterday, she tried to understand what this feeling was. After some time, the couple arrived at the ceremony site and exited the carriage together. At this moment, the elders of Birch met the children and first of all greeted the main character. Mikhail noticed that Liarte was especially beautiful today, as if she had descended from heaven. The girl herself simply nodded and looked away in embarrassment because she was too nervous because of the dream. Continuing, the younger gentleman warned that even though he would be protecting the female lead today, she still had to remember the necklace. And after everything had been discussed, Bercha and Liarte headed inside. As soon as the door opened, everyone greeted the main character. Upon seeing the girl, those present began to admire her beauty because they did not know that the daughter of the Elheims was so beautiful. And after a few minutes, Birch decided to begin the coming-of-age ceremony. Noticing the main character's anxiety, the Duke asked her not to be nervous. Carmen also explained that Liarte might not talk about what she saw during the ritual because it's good when what was seen is stored in the memory of only one person. After these words, the man took the cross and cut himself with it in order to drip blood onto the main character's hand. And as soon as the Duke finished, Liarte immediately closed her eyes, expecting a vision. A second later, the girl saw herself sitting in Mikhail's arms. The young man himself said that it doesn't matter to him at all what kind of future the main character sees. After all, the most important thing is that the younger gentleman can no longer live without Liarte. After these words, the girl opened her eyes and instantly turned towards Mikhail. And although the heroine does not know what the illusion she saw means, she assumes that she felt the love that the young man spoke about. Now Liarte is not yet completely sure of her guesses, but this feeling fills her to tears. After some time, the main character was already having fun at the ball with everyone else. Lionel and Viamin, observing their sister, noticed that she looked very happy. Duke Elheim himself was confused and could not find words. At this moment, Leon thought to himself that the main character had really forgotten the Elheims. However, the young man will never let Liarte go, even if she has forgotten her family. Thinking about this, the young man with a stern face approached the main character and addressed her. The girl, seeing Leon, was a little surprised, since she didn't know that he would come. And the young man explained that he couldn't help but come because he was invited. But at that moment, Mikhail intervened in the conversation, informing them that the invitation had been sent to the Elheim family by mistake. This made Liana angry, and he reminded the younger master that he was talking to his sister now, not him. Hearing this, Mikhail asked the young man why he called Liarte his sister, despite the fact that she had long since severed all ties with Elheim. However, seeing the tension between the boys, the heroine told the younger gentleman that she was okay, and if Leon wanted to say something, she would talk to him for a bit. After all, in any case, this issue would have to be resolved someday. After these words, Leon and the main character retired to one of the rooms. The young man immediately noticed that Liarte looked happy, as if she had completely forgotten about the Elheims, to which the girl responded positively and said that her real family is Bishre. However, Liana found this funny and asked his sister why she thought the Birches were considered her family. And then, grabbing the main character by the shoulders, the young man shouted that she would never become part of Birsche. And continuing, Leon asked the girl not to forget that she was Liarte Elheim. However, at that moment, the main character pulled her hand away and reminded the young man that she would never return to the Elheims. Leon, feeling his sister's strength, was taken aback because on the day when he first saw her abilities, she was not so strong. Therefore, the young man believed that if Liarte returned, he would be able to use this power. So now Leon has definitely decided that he needs to take the main character by any means necessary. Thinking about this, the young man warned Liarte that her rejection of the Elheims would not change the fact that he was her brother. But the girl told Leon that he never considered her a sister, so now he should leave and not look for her anymore. And when the young man tried to stop Liarte, Mikhail blocked his path, reminding him that it was time for him to leave. After these words, the younger gentleman turned to the main character, saying that it was time to dance. And then Mikhail asked Liarte if the conversation was over, to which she replied in the affirmative, since she had nothing more to say. Having finished their conversation, the guys headed towards the exit, and Leon looked after them and clenched his fist in anger. Already during the dance, Mikhail asked about Liarte's condition and whether she regretted letting the Elheims into the ceremony. And the main character replied that it didn't matter to her whether her former family was here or not. Hearing this, the young man sighed and said that he wanted the Elheims to come, as he hoped that they would repent when they saw Liarte happy. However, the girl explained that the Elheims would still remain the same and nothing would ever change them. And Mikhail, agreeing with this, suggested that the main character not think about it, because her past family is worth nothing. Continuing, the younger gentleman said that now he thinks only of Liarte, because she is the most precious thing to him. After these words, the girl said that during the ritual she saw Mikhail and felt an unfamiliar feeling, so she wonders if these illusions are somehow connected with Birch's abilities. However, the young man, after a short silence, continued the dance and told Liarte that in time she would understand everything herself. But suddenly, the couple was interrupted by the crown prince, who bowed and apologized for being late. Continuing, Lucas congratulated the heroine on her coming of age and asked her to do him the honor of dancing one dance with him. This surprised Liarte, and confused she asked again, to which the young man repeated his words and said that he had been watching the heroine back in Elheim. However, remembering that Lucas never looked at her when he came to Elheim, the girl apologized and refused. And when the prince asked the reason for her refusal, the girl explained that she did not want to dance with a man who had put Birch in danger. At this point, Mikael also turned to Lucas and said that he always wanted to thank him for his kindness. But the younger master didn't know how to repay the crown prince, so he was very worried and glad that he came himself. And continuing, the young man reminded that the Bircha never forget anything and return everything without exception. To this, the crown prince grinned and replied that he was looking forward to his return. Already heading in the opposite direction, Lucas thought that the guys were stubborn, but he understood that if Hestel managed to change his thinking, then even Liarte would not be able to do anything. At this moment, the young man suddenly met Hestel and inquired about the location of Duke Charon. And the girl said that although she had not yet met the Duke, she had heard that he had already arrived. What he heard angered the crown prince, because Charon is Hestel's man, and he is disappointed that she does not know where he is. Therefore, the young man called the girl stupid, reminding her that she had no right to make a mistake, and that she had to bring him Elheim's daughter. So, continuing, the young man ordered Hestel to take advantage of the moment and find an excuse to get close to the main character. After some time, the girl saw Liarte in the crowd and was delighted by her beauty. And Hestel was going to approach the heroine when she was alone, but they did not leave her for a moment. The girl herself had heard that the Birches were looking after Liarte, but she hadn't thought it was that strong. Hestel also knew that Bircha was a rather gloomy place, but now she noticed that everything had changed a lot because of the main character. And remembering the words of the crown prince about the similarity with Liarte, the girl considered it unfair that they had different positions. After all, Hestel thought that if she was like the main character, then she also had every right to Bircha's love, wealth, and power. And having thought everything over, the girl took a glass of wine and approached Liarte. After greeting her, Hestel introduced herself and said that it was a great honor for her to meet the heroine. Continuing, the girl said that the taste of the wine was amazing, and she thought that Liarte would like it too, so she brought a glass. However, the main character refused, but Hestel asked her not to refuse and, approaching, began to drop the glass. And Liarte, reacting in time, returned the wine to the glass with the help of her power. Seeing this, everyone present was shocked, as this was the first time they had seen the water power that everyone was talking about. Hestel was very unhappy that the main character used force. But, approaching Liarte, the girl looked at her with confusion and said that she had heard about her abilities, but it was very impressive to see it in real life. And continuing, Hestel thanked the heroine for correcting her mistake, and also said that she wanted to give something as a token of gratitude. Liarte herself considered it disgusting that the girl first pretended that she was seeing her for the first time, and now called her Mrs. Elheim. So, handing the glass back, the heroine said that nothing serious had happened, so no apologies or gifts were needed, and Hestel could enjoy the event. The girl, realizing that she had not even been given a chance, awkwardly thanked Liarte and said nothing more. At this point, the main character had already approached Bircha, who admired her abilities and were interested in Hestel's personality. Because of what happened, all the guests turned their attention to the girl and began to discuss among themselves that she was the same Mrs. Hestel, famous for her talent for drawing. Also, one of those present said that he heard that Hestel painted a red picture that won the competition. And after these words, the guests complimented the girl, saying that the presented painting was magnificent. The main character, having heard the discussion of her painting, turned around sharply in surprise and froze. A second later, Liarte walked towards Hestel, saying that she had a question. Continuing, the main character asked the girl if she really painted that red picture. Hestel smiled at this and expressed her surprise that the rumors had spread so far. And after these words, the girl noticed Duke Charon in the crowd, and mentally noted that he had arrived just in time and would be able to confirm that she was the author of the painting. So, without further ado, Hestel replied that she was the author of that painting. At this moment, the guests, hearing this again, immediately began to compliment the girl. However, Liarte interrupted the discussion and said that she was interested in the meaning behind the painting. This made Hestel a little nervous, but she said that she had painted the sun, which she liked so much. The guests found this strange, because for them such a meaning was too straightforward for an abstract painting. Listening to all this, Hestel began to get angry, and, unable to bear it, she shouted out with the assumption that those present wanted to say that she was not the author of the painting. And the main character at that moment came closer to the girl and noted that everything was exactly like that. Hestel called what she heard rude, and asked Liarte how she could be so sure of her words. And the main character said that everything is simple, because she is the owner of that painting. Hearing this, Hestel could not believe what was said because the prince said not to worry, since the owner of the painting had already died. However, the girl realized that even if Liarte was telling the truth, she would not be able to prove it because the painting was already in the palace. So, after thinking about it, Hestel asked the main character for evidence that she was telling the truth. At this point, Carmen intervened in the conversation and replied that there was a cash prize and a letter as proof. Hestel herself was taken aback by this because she didn't even know about the existence of a reward. Also, Mikael, coming closer, said that there was more proof, since this painting is a sacred image, painted with colors blessed by the Saint of Light. Continuing, the younger gentleman explained that only Bircha had such paints, and Liarte, being a strong awakened one, was able to use them. Hearing this, Duke Charon was surprised, but now he was completely sure that the real owner of the painting was Lady Elheim. And at this time, the main character said that the picture depicted not the sun, but Mikael's eyes. The younger gentleman was confused by this, and he simply looked at Liarte in confusion. Everyone present immediately began to condemn Hestel for appropriating someone else's painting and spreading false rumors. After listening to everything, the girl could not stand it and quickly headed towards Duke Charon. Running up, Hestel grabbed the Duke, asking him to say something since he knew that she was the author of the painting. At that moment, the young man realized that the girl was sent by the prince because she knew that he was Jen Walker. And thinking about this, Charon answered Hestel that he knew from the very beginning that she was lying. These words horrified the girl, and she immediately headed towards the exit, feeling so ashamed. The Duke himself then approached Liarte and, introducing himself, sincerely congratulated her on her coming-of-age ceremony and her victory in the competition. Continuing, the young man asked the main character to give him a little time after the banquet, as he wanted to ask her for something. Hestel, standing on the balcony, was furious and could not come to terms with the fact that she had been disgraced in front of many aristocrats. However, the girl decided that she would definitely take revenge, especially on the main character. After these thoughts, Hestel realized that she urgently needed to talk to the prince about the hypnosis plan. But the girl's loneliness was broken at that moment by the younger gentleman. Seeing the young man, Hestel smiled, assuming that he followed her because he was worried. The girl thought that Mikael was interested in her because she looked like Liarte. Thinking about this, the girl asked the younger gentleman if he had come because he was worried about her. Continuing, Hestel said that everything is completely different from what the main character said, and it is a lie. And the girl would be happy if the young man believed her. However, Mikael was angry, and noted that Hestel was the only one lying here. And the younger gentleman has no time for the girl, so he immediately inquired about the whereabouts of the painting. Hestel, knowing that she couldn't say that the crown prince was involved, replied that she didn't know where the painting was. Hearing this, Mikael assumed that the girl would talk in the Bircha dungeon, since they have many professionals in interrogations. But Hestel was taken aback by this and asked the young man what he meant. And the younger gentleman expressed his suspicions that the girl hoped to steal Birch's thing and leave with a clear conscience. This made Hestel very nervous and she couldn't answer. However, the dialogue was suddenly interrupted by the main character, who informed Mikael about the beginning of the second song. Seeing Liarte, the young man immediately smiled and asked her how long she had been waiting. As she was leaving, the heroine asked the young man about the topic of conversation with Hestel, but he replied that they had not discussed anything special. Before leaving, Liarte herself looked sternly at Hestel, trying to understand what she had in mind. The girl was furious that another person was only talking about the main character and didn't understand how she was worse than her. But, noticing that the sun was setting, Hestel smiled because now she could use her power. After some time, sitting on the couch, Mikael asked Liarte if she was tired, to which she replied negatively and said that she was having a lot of fun. Continuing, the main character noted that the young man also looked happy, and he confirmed this because he managed to dance with her 3 times. Then the younger gentleman asked Liarte if she was upset about Hestel, since she had shamelessly stolen her painting. And Mikael also promised the main character that he would get her job back by any means necessary. However, Liarte replied that everyone had found out who the real owner of the painting was, and besides, the young man was even more angry than her, so all her sadness went away. Blushing, the young man remembered that the heroine had called the painting Peace, and asked about its meaning. And the girl explained that she was curious about how Mikael saw the world. After all, Liarte did not understand how the young man was able to notice her when she was invisible to others. The main character also found it surprising that Mikael was worried about the wound when she didn't notice it. And the girl didn't know how she looked in the eyes of the younger master, since he cared about her and protected her so much. Because everyone hated Liarte, didn't consider him human, and she wondered why she looked different in his eyes. When the girl herself entered Mikhail's world, everything around her changed. After all, the main character now has hope and a desire to live. After these words, Mikhail took Liarte by the hand and told him that when they first met, he lost the meaning of life and sank into deep apathy. After all, the young man lost his sight due to a curse, his grandfather went mad, and the royal family and the Elheims held back Bersha. Members of the Bersha family who cannot control their power are eliminated, so Carmen was obliged to deal with Mikhail and Aaron. And the younger master did not have the slightest hope that his sight would return upon arrival in Elheim, because he knew that it was almost impossible to get rid of the curse. Each new day meant one of two things for Mikhail. Either he would be consumed by his own uncontrollable power, or he would die at the hands of his father. However, in the world of the younger master, the main heroine suddenly appeared. A bright ray of light appeared in the bottomless darkness of the young man's heart. And although Mikhail did not see Liarte, he felt everything connected with her. So even without his sight, the younger gentleman would be happy to be next to the main character. The boy no longer cared that he could not see, so if Liarte had not cured him, the result would have remained the same. After all, when the young man met the heroine, his world changed, and it was she who saved him. And, taking the girl by the cheeks, Mikhail tenderly said that he loved her, which made her lower her gaze in embarrassment. Continuing, the younger gentleman said that he always wanted to tell about his feelings, and that he was ready to do anything for the sake of his love. And before the heroine had time to respond to the confession, the young man interrupted her with the words that he did not require an answer, because he simply wanted to confess. Liarte herself did not know if she could tell the young man about her feelings right now, since despite the fact that the girl felt something similar, she was not sure that the feelings were the same. However, the main character does not want to leave in the dark the man who so confidently tells her about love. So, taking Mikhail's hand, the girl decided to tell everything as it is. With a serious face, Liarte said that she also liked the younger gentleman, and that meeting him was the greatest luck in her life. However, the main character needs a little more time to say words of love, but she will definitely answer, as she will be as confident as the young man. Continuing, the girl noted that Mikhail just needed to wait a little because she would tell him everything soon. And, at first surprised, the younger gentleman nevertheless said with complete tenderness in his eyes that he would wait, even if it took several years. But the young man also asked Liarte not to communicate closely with other men while she thought about her answer. The young man then put on a sweet face and explained that it upsets him a lot when the main character gets close to other people. Hearing this, the girl said that there were no other men around her because Mikhail alone was enough for her, and she was already dizzy from him. After this, the couple held each other's little fingers and sealed their promise. At this moment, Liarte noticed that the younger gentleman became very pleased and happy with the promise, and the girl had an idea about the day when she could confidently confess her love to Mikhail. So now she also wants this moment to come quickly. The prince at this time was surprised that the author of the painting was Liarte, and was angry because the situation had become more complicated due to Hestel's stupid prank. Suddenly, Karen stood in Lucas's way and he immediately rejoiced at his arrival, saying that it was time to put the plan into action. However, the Duke immediately interrupted the young man with a refusal, reminding him that he had said that the prince would pay if he decided to deceive him. After all, it became known that the identity of the fire tamer in the palace of the crown prince and that Mrs. Hestel is the author of the painting are lies. The prince decided not to hide the truth any longer, but immediately asked with a grin what an ordinary duke could do to the crown prince of the empire. Continuing, the young man said that Karen was a backup plan and he would find a way to take Lady Elheim without his help. However, the Duke irritably repeated that he did not forgive deception, and the Crown Prince was no exception. Lucas himself knew that without Karen, he would be able to bring the main character, despite the danger of the method. After all, the young man doesn't care about the risks and dangers if they manage to lure Liarte. Reaching the balcony, the young man asked if Hestel was ready, to which she turned around and, looking at him with a wild look, replied that she was ready. After all, the moon has risen and the girl is full of strength to begin implementing the plan. When Mikhail and Liarte returned, the Duke asked where they had been, and the young man replied that they needed to talk. However, at that moment, a loud explosion suddenly occurred, causing everyone to turn around instantly. And just a second later, people began to run away in panic and shout about the danger. The younger gentleman, hearing the familiar sound, immediately became thoughtful and began to remember that he had heard it somewhere before. There was a similar explosion last time, so Mikhail immediately assumed that this was the Crown Prince's doing again. Seeing the guests in a state of great panic, Carmen began to shout for everyone to remain calm, as they would definitely find out the reason soon. At this time, Mikhail took Liarte by the shoulders and asked her to wait, explaining that as soon as they figured out the reason, they would return. The girl agreed to this, saying that in this case she would protect the people in the hall. And the young man was at first surprised by the heroine's seriousness and steadfastness, but then he smiled and realized that this was precisely why he loved her. Thinking about this, Mikhail said that he was hoping for Liarte and immediately asked if she had the necklace, to which the girl immediately took it out. The younger gentleman then cautiously asked the girl not to trust anyone except the people of Birch, but also informed her that if anything happened, he would immediately come to her. When Birch left, the main character immediately began to watch the hall and the guests, who continued to panic. Afterwards, using her power, Liarte decided to calm the people down by saying that she would protect them. And turning to Andrel, the girl asked him to check if there were any wounded on other floors. The guests, thanks to the power of water, instantly calmed down and thanked the main character. However, while Liarte was listening to the gratitude, someone approached her from behind. Turning around, the girl saw the Dark Knight Birch, and he immediately told her that on the ground floor, due to an explosion, a building had collapsed and there were casualties. Continuing, the young man said that the main character's help was needed there, so he was interested in whether she would go with him. As soon as the Dark Knight and Liarte arrived at the right place, she worriedly inquired about the whereabouts of the victims. However, at that moment, the young man fell unconscious, which greatly horrified the main character. And falling to her knees, the girl immediately began to check the knight's condition and whether he was safe. But Liarte was told that the guy fell unconscious because the hypnosis wore off, so there was no need to worry. It was Lady Hestel, who stood above the main character and watched what was happening. Liarte, continuing to sit next to the knight, asked the girl why she was there. And almost immediately the heroine frowned, as she assumed that it was Hestel who had caused all the chaos. The girl laughed at this and noted that no one had forbidden her to do such things. After all, Hestel also has an ability that allows her to control people. And under the bright, full moon, a girl can calmly take over someone else's mind. Hearing this, the main character became wary and realized that something was wrong here, so she needed to use force and call Mikhail. However, Liarte noticed that no matter how much force she used, nothing happened. Hestel told the heroine that there was no need to worry because she was not her mistress. But continuing, the girl said that the Crown Prince would become the master of Liarte. And as soon as the main character's mind was taken over, she felt ill, so she began to fall to the ground. However, Lucas managed to catch the girl while she was grimacing from the pain and discomfort in her body. Smiling, the prince told Liarte to relax, because when she woke up, she would already be a doll created for him. And Hestel noted that while the main character is absent, she will be able to take her place, so there is no need to worry in this regard either. Liarte herself, closing her eyes, was horrified and fought against her condition to the last. And when the heroine finally lost consciousness, the power of water began to swirl around her while she continued to hold the necklace. At this time, the Birches stood and tried to figure out the reason, discussing everything with each other. The Dark Knight held out an ancient symbol, saying that it was the same stone as last time. And continuing, the young man said that this was definitely the work of the Crown Prince. However, only an explosion was heard, and there was absolutely no flame anywhere. Hearing this, the younger gentleman realized that since there was no fire but a strong explosion, it was a decoy. But suddenly, Birch's discussion was interrupted by a melody, causing them to immediately exchange glances. And realizing where this sound was coming from, Mikhail immediately turned around, realizing that the main character needed help. At that moment, the water around Liarte grew larger and larger with each passing second, as if magic was protecting her. Looking at what was happening, the prince was surprised and asked Hestel how this was possible, since Liarte was under control and could not use water power. The girl watched from the side and was confident that the spell was cast correctly, so then Hestel suggested that the water power of the main character was trying to protect her. and the hypnosis itself was successful, and over time the resistance will disappear, which means Lucas will be able to control Liarte's power when she wakes up. After these words, the Crown Prince turned in the right direction, saying that they needed to hurry and return before Birchie arrived. But as soon as the boys started moving, their path was blocked by a younger gentleman. Mikhail, seeing his beloved in the arms of the Crown Prince, was shocked, asking what he had done. However, Lucas was no less shocked because he did not understand how the young man came so quickly. But the younger gentleman looked only at Liart, who was lying unconscious in someone else's arms. And having summoned magic, Mikhail began to insult the Crown Prince, saying that it was as if he himself was begging to be killed. Therefore, the young man believed that since Lucas wished it so, he would fulfill his will. The younger master's strength grabbed the prince by the throat, causing him to immediately begin to choke and beg to be released. And while the force held Lucas, the main character hung in the air and with the help of magic headed towards Mikhail. The young man grabbed Liart and pressed him to himself, continuing to strangle the Crown Prince without looking away. At this point, Hestel started screaming that the heroine was under hypnosis, and if the Birches didn't want her to be harmed, then they should give her to the Crown Prince. However, this did not frighten the young man at all, and he told the girl to try to do something. Hearing this, Hestel panicked and started shouting that if she wanted to, she would do it. However, the girl was not allowed to finish speaking because of Mikhail's powers, which caused her to go crazy. The younger gentleman also decided to remind that anyone who has once seen the power of Birch dies. And while the young man reacted ironically to the future death of the Crown Prince and Hestel, they continued to choke from his strength. However, the magic began to consume Mikhail himself, because such an amount of power can destroy even the owner himself. But at that moment, Carmen grabbed the younger gentleman, asking him not to lose control and stop. Because if the young man doesn't stop right now, he will harm himself and Liarte. The main character, with the last of her strength, opened her eyes and turned to the young man. And as soon as the girl completely lost consciousness again, Mikhail came to his senses and immediately began to look at her, calling her by name. The magic disappeared, and the Crown Prince and Hestel began to cough and try to come to their senses. Then Lucas immediately said that such an attitude towards the Prince of the Empire will not go unpunished, and the Emperor will not turn a blind eye to it. The man turned to the prince and said that he clearly had not yet come to his senses, and Carmen warned Hestel and Lucas not to even dream of leaving here alive. The main character herself opened her eyes at that moment and was surprised by the large amount of water around her. But when Liarte heard a familiar voice, she immediately turned towards the source. The Spirit King smiled, saying that the girl was in her unconscious world, and also noted that they had not seen each other for a long time. Seeing the young man, the main character was surprised, because he had changed a little, to which he said that, although not completely, his strength had returned to him. And continuing, the young man also said that he will be very cool when he gets all his power back. Then the Spirit King looked at Liart with a smile, saying that she too had changed since she found a real family. After these words, the main character remembered pleasant moments associated with Bersha, and her soul felt warm. After all, the girl is very happy that she finally has a real family. The Spirit King was glad to hear this and said that he hoped it would continue this way. But continuing, the young man clarified that he needed to say something about the Queen of Darkness, whom he had sealed. Because the young man clearly feels the energy of his half, and he is sure that something is happening, so Liarte must be careful. However, leaning towards the main character, the Spirit King said that there was no need to worry too much. After all, the young man promises to always protect Liarte's happiness and not allow anything bad to happen in her life. After these words, the girl came to her senses and, opening her eyes, saw the Birch family first. The men immediately asked the main character about her condition with concern. And sitting down, Liarte began to calm everyone down, saying that everything was fine, so there was no need to worry. However, the girl suddenly remembered that before she lost consciousness, Mikhail had been unwell. Therefore, immediately looking at the younger gentleman, the main character asked him if everything was okay. The young man himself, without taking his eyes off Liarte, cried and could not calm down. And while the girl looked at Mikhail in shock, he said that he thought he would lose her. And when the younger gentleman saw the girl in such a state, a veil covered his eyes and he saw no one but her. Continuing, the young man apologized to Liarte for not being able to protect her, as he should have stayed by her side. The heroine herself recalled that even when Mikhail's future was clouded by a curse, he always remained calm. And now the girl was surprised that the younger gentleman was scared when he realized that he could lose her. So, thinking about it, Liarte realized that these words of the young man spoke of love. Then the main character hugged Mikhail and asked him why he decided that he couldn't protect her, because she was safe thanks to him. And, thanking the younger gentleman, the girl reported that she was fine. Hearing this, the young man responded by hugging Liarte tightly and expressing his joy that everything was fine. The elders of Birch were watching everything that was happening at that moment and smiling warmly. The heroine, turning her gaze to the men, thanked them because even being in danger, she was not afraid thanks to the pendant. And when the girl asked about what happened to the Crown Prince and Hestel, Carmen said that they were locked in the basement. And the Duke would like to kill both the girl and Lucas. However, if Liarte does not want this, they will come up with something else. After some time, Carmen came to the basement and said that when the curse was lifted from his father, he thought that nothing else would happen, but Hestel and the prince showed up. Continuing, the man asked the boys if they liked their quarters. However, Lucas was enraged by this and, surprised by the Duke's insolence, ordered him to be released immediately. But Carmen recalled that he had previously warned that if the imperial palace touched Liarte, he would not remain idle. And this made the young man even more angry, so he asked the Duke if he was sure that he would survive after what he had done to the Prince of the Empire. At this, the man smiled and suggested testing how valuable the precious Crown Prince was to this empire. Carmen then told Lucas that she was not going to kill him now. After all, the Duke wants to exchange the young man for leaving the wing of the imperial court and becoming a separate principality of Birche. After these words, the young man panicked and could not answer anything. The man himself acted on the basis that Liarte had told him not to kill the Crown Prince, because when Carmen suggested that the heroine felt sorry for Lucas, she responded negatively. After all, the girl believed that since the prince and Hestel wanted to change her thinking, it meant that their goal was not only her, and they also wanted to harm Birch, so Liarte would never forgive the guys. However, the main character had an idea of how to use the Crown Prince for Birch's purposes. And now Carmen, remembering the conversation, considered Liarte very smart and was surprised that she even thought about how easy it would be for Birche to gain independence. Thinking about this, the Duke expressed his hopes that a good price would be paid for Lucas and that the deal would be profitable. At this point, Hestel intervened in the conversation and began to beg to be released, since in her opinion, she had done nothing wrong and was only following the prince's orders. Hearing this, Carmen assumed that the girl was sad in the damp little dungeon. And Hestel immediately agreed in a panic, continuing to ask for her release faster. However, the man turned to Marilyn and ordered her to kill the girl. The maid immediately took out her blade, saying that she accepted the order. And after these words, Merlin entered Hestel's cell and began to carry out the order. Being bedridden for the second day, the main character tried to prove to Mikhail that she was okay. But the younger gentleman did not agree with this because the doctor clearly stated that side effects on the mind and abilities may appear later. At that moment, the fox suddenly jumped off, starting to scream loudly, and the young man noticed that she was also saying that Liarte needed to rest. Hearing this, the main character realized that everyone was too worried about her. Then the girl asked Mikhail for permission to ask something. Continuing, Liarte said that on that day, she opened her eyes for a second and saw the younger master using force. However, the main character is sure that it was not the force of death, but something else. That's why she wants Mikhail to tell her honestly what Birch's real strength is.